I'm impressed. Wow. What time is it? It's 12:44. So thank you all. I hope you enjoyed lunch. Can you hear me? I don't know how you guys do this with microphones. I could never do it. I'd spend the whole time going, can they hear me? Do they not hear me? Closer, Jessica, like that? Oh, it feels so loud. Okay, so I just want to say one thing. First of all, as far as the seam line that some of you are watching, I'm putting my phone down. In this booklet that you all have, and I hope that you'll keep it, there's information about everything that we do. There's the bios of the speakers, but also there's a QR code. The same one QR code goes to the portal. You hear me? Do they hear me okay? Goes to the portal of the conference. From that portal, you can access everything, meaning you can access the seam line. It is a 5-part documentary on Jerusalem that we launched in May 2023. It's free, but you can get to it from there and watch all 5 episodes. One thing I wanted to say about the movie this morning is that we finished that movie this morning. Our team in Israel, it's part of a bigger project called The Primer, which is also in your book, which Hussein and Dahlia and Havi and another almost dozen experts from the Arab world are part of. It's going to be launched in the beginning of 2025. What you saw this morning was a specific snippet because there was a request of kind of talking about the evolution of the Jews in the land of Israel, the evolution of the state of Israel. So we've been working on it for a very long time. Our team in Israel is based in Haifa. And this week, if you've been watching the news, they had red alerts and missile, and they have 2 little girls that are studying from home because the schools are closed. So they pushed through under missile alerts and going to the shelter and having 2 little girls Zoom schooled from home, but we didn't completely finish it. So what you saw today of the seam line with subtitles and music, it will have that, we'll perfect it, it will have subtitles, music, but we needed something this morning, but because of the situation, it's not 100% done. This video, as it is now, will be available on the portal, probably later this evening, maximum tomorrow. In addition, yesterday's Beth El is recording today and yesterday, and they're going to edit it, and that will also be up on the portal. So we really encourage you to keep going back and checking, and we have more surprises that will be there. But I just wanted to give that, because some people asked if there was subtitles on the movie this morning, and the reason that it wasn't because we did our best, given the circumstances, to have a product that we hope you felt was valuable this morning, but it'll be better. Avi. Thank you. How you use the microphone? You have to make sure they can hear you.
The boss asked me to ask you if you hear me well. Okay, believe it or not, we are a little bit ahead of schedule, right? So we have one more space for one more question before segueing to the next thing.
Hussein takes the floor, there was a good question. Please elaborate what is driving the apparent collaboration between Sunni and Shiite factions. Is it just about the agreement that destruction of Israel is pivotal to both of their visions of the future? Is Fatah completely out of the power now?
Yes, specifically referring to the axis of resistance that we talked about in the previous presentation, and I was talking about the fact that Hamas and Islamic Jihad, Sunni Palestinian organization, are part of this axis, which is predominantly Shiite. Obviously, we understand, based upon the background that I provided, that there is a lot of differences, not to say competition and not to say even animosity on an ideological level, because Hamas and Islamic Jihad are coming from the Sunni camp. The others are coming from the Shiite camp. We talked about the Sunni-Shiite rivalry, and shortly you are going to hear more about it from Hussein. So you are definitely looking at something that I call deliberately a marriage of convenience. That marriage of convenience, in the end of the day, is the glue that brings together is their animosity and their vowing to eliminate the state of Israel and their non-compromising animosity towards the West and its values, as I was explaining before. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking about Sunnis and Shiites and Iran, the Mullah regime in Iran, the axis of resistance, and it will be only a natural segue to our next session with my good friend and distinguished expert, Hussein Abdul Hussein, who will elaborate and inform you with an additional better understanding. Hussein, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Avi. Thank you, everyone. I'll build on what you heard from Avi this morning. I promise not to go very deep into history, but I'll try. So let's start with this. How did all of this story started, the people that we call Islamists today, or Islamism? I know you don't have the answer. I'll answer it. In 1798, Napoleon of France landed in Alexandria. There was an Islamic rule. The Mamluks were there at the time. And he asked them to surrender their sovereignty. And they said, what? No, we'll crush you under the hooves of our horses. And Napoleon said, okay. They met for battle. It took Napoleon with cannons, of course, and they were on horses. It took him 10 minutes to decimate the whole army and take over Egypt. That was the first time that Islam had been defeated on its own territory. And that was the first time that they had come into contact with the Europeans face to face with the West. And from that point on, they started sending delegations from Egypt, from other Arab countries, not countries at the time, provinces, Ottoman provinces, to Egypt. And these people, who were mainly scholars, looked at Europe and were surprised. You know, they saw that the people who were governing were liable. They were under the authority of their citizens. This was unheard of in the Arab countries. In the Arab countries, there's king. King is appointed by God. Everyone listens to the king, and that's that. So these people, when they started coming back from Europe and seeing that Europeans called themselves French, Dutch, English, they didn't have similar answers for themselves. So they started thinking, what are we? Now, of course, many of them said Muslim, some of them said Ottoman, maybe Arab. So this is where the trip started, and this is what we call the age of Arab Renaissance. And around the same time, there happened the Jewish Haskalah, which is the equivalent of the Jews debating among each other, what are we? And this is how Zionism started. This is how nationalism started. So when these Arabs started debating, okay, so what do we do? They were split into two teams. Team one said, okay, look, religion belongs to the 7th century. Let's put it in context and let's start endorsing Western ideals. In French, liberté, égalité, fraternité, you know, and what we call here life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All these ideas, the Arabs started endorsing, especially the equal rights for women. But then you had another team, and this other team said, no, the reason we lag behind the West is because we abandoned true Islam. Because Muslims stopped applying Islam as it should be during its golden age in the 7th century. They said the reason why we were glorious and golden between the 7th and the 12th century was that because everyone practiced actual Islam. These two schools fought it out. The first school won for some time, and it took over, and we had all these military dictatorships, and they promised everyone heaven on earth. And of course, you know the rest of the story. It was corruption and failing states, and nothing worked. So now came the turn of the Islamists. The Islamist think that they should restore everything to the way it was in the 7th century, whether it's about women staying in the home or whether about Muslims have to be engaged in ongoing jihad against anyone who's not Muslim. This is where Islamism comes from. This is the school that produced Islamism that we have today. And this kept on evolving mainly in Egypt, but by people who are not necessarily Egyptian, people who are from Syria, from Palestine, from Lebanon, from these areas. This kept on evolving without getting a grasp of power. And when the Egyptian president Abdel Nasser was in power, he chased them and he hunted them down and he threw them in prison. But their thinking never went away. So the thinking is that we go back to Islam, we elect someone from amongst us, we recreate the caliphate. It didn't work in any Arab country. Where did it work? In a non-Arab country, in Iran. So the Iranians, the Shia, of course everyone we were talking about was Sunni. Now the Shia like the idea. Mind you, the Shia, which is, I was born a Shia, the Shia oppose having religion as part of government because they are waiting for the Messiah, the 12th Imam, Muhammad al-Mahdi. And when the 12th Imam comes, that's only the time when they should take over government. So they were not interested. Now Khomeini shows up, he endorses the Sunni idea of Islamism, and he takes it to Iran. Despite the opposition of every one of his peers, they were saying, no, you're going against our basic principle. He said, I don't care. So Khomeini took over Iran, and he tried to preach his kind of Islamism far and wide. This is why Shia Islam, which really doesn't pin any importance on Jerusalem or the Dome of the Rock, or in fact, the Dome of the Rock was built by a Sunni Umayyad who killed the 3rd Shia Imam. So they hate the Dome of the Rock. They hate Al-Aqsa. They hate Sunnis. There's not a single Palestinian who is Shia. So just for you to get an understanding of how much this whole story is irrelevant to the Shia. But Khomeini decided to change that. He started preaching, okay, Jerusalem this, Jerusalem that, we're going to liberate it. The reason he did that was that he was thinking, if he endorses this issue of the Sunnis will follow him. So he will become the king of not only the Shia, but the Shia and the Sunni. So this is how it started. And when Khomeini started his revolution, in 1979, he took over, the monarch, Shah Reza Pahlavi, left Iran and Khomeini took over. Khomeini didn't really know how to go on. I mean, he wanted to go to Jerusalem, but there were like half a dozen countries between him and Israel. So he started, okay, let's start with Iraq. So he picked a fight with Iraq, the war started. Except that Iraq was not a walkover, number one. Number two, all of the wealthy Gulf countries came to Iraq's support and rescue, so they gave Iraq a lot of money. Mind you, Iraq is wealthy. They're the second biggest exporters of oil in OPEC today. So in addition to their wealth, they got extra wealth. And then they got the United States also. We were interested in seeing Khomeini not prevail because he was, cuckoo. So he started this war, and the war came to a stalemate. 1980, he started the war. 1988, Khomeini realized that there was no way he was going to beat Saddam. So he went on TV and he said, I will drink the poison cup and that's that, I will end the war. He was somehow pragmatic. He understood that if you can't win a war, you have to stop. He died a year later. His closest aide, Ali Khamenei, who's the current supreme leader, took over. This was the biggest lesson to Iran, that if they want to restore their empire from 1500 years ago, if they wanted to restore the empire, they couldn't fight using their own army. They have to come up with a different model. Now, which model did they pick? The model that they picked, they had designed during the 1980-1988 war between them and Iraq. They had designed a model wherein they use militias outside of Iran for Iranian goals. Oh, so let me elaborate. So Islamism is not national. So Islamism is not restricted within one country. Islamism is cross-national. So you can pledge allegiance to Khomeini and be a resident of Pikesville or New York or London or anywhere. And Islamism can preach. It's just like communism. You know, communists do not recognize borders. Communism is for everyone. Workers of the world unite. You go anywhere, anyone who joins your Communist Party, you pledge allegiance to the Communist Party in Moscow, and that's that. So this is how Islamism works. It's a hybrid between whatever these guys discovered in Egypt, the Islamists, and communism. This is the brand that the Iranians have, the brand of Islamism. Along these lines, these Iranians have connected with the Shia in Lebanon. And these Shia in Lebanon, most of them, by the way, this is the irony, most of them were communists. So, you know, communists are atheists anyway. But, you know, communism was declining. It was drying up, no more money. And here comes Iran with its oil money. So why not join Iran, you know? And we're Shia, like they're Shia and we're Shia, so why not? So when they first used Hezbollah, they set up Hezbollah in 1982. I was in the town where they set up Hezbollah. I was growing up in Baalbek in 1982 when the Pasdaran, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, appeared in Baalbek and started recruiting people. They paid $100 for every man who grows his beard, and $300, this is a month, $300 for every woman who wears the chador, the black abaya, that covers all the body. In 1982, this was a hefty sum. So they started recruiting, but this is the story that you hear in the media. In the media, you will hear that Hezbollah was formed in 1982 after Israel invaded Lebanon as a reaction. This is nonsense. Hezbollah was formed with Israel not being part of their thinking. Hezbollah was formed because Iran was engaged in war with Iraq and wanted to use points of leverage. So when they formed Hezbollah, what were the first bombings and attacks of Hezbollah? The US Embassy in 1983, the US Marine Barracks in 1983 in Beirut, the US Embassy Annex in Beirut in 1984, the French force in Beirut, and most importantly, and you know, people forget this sometimes, Hezbollah took a bunch of Western hostages, at least 8 to 12 Western hostages. And Hezbollah said, okay, we've taken these Western hostages, and if you want them back, you talk to Tehran. And this is the first time that we detected this connection between these two sides. So America, of course, you know, we're always nice, and we listen to terrorists and say, de-escalate, love, peace, truce. So, okay, we'll do that. What do you want? So Tehran said, okay, we'll give you the hostages, but you give us arms to fight Iraq. And this, for those who remember, was Iran Gate, Iran-Contra Gate, 1986. So we ended up shipping arms to Iran for them to release the hostages. So this was the basic function of Hezbollah. It was invented to serve Iranian interest. And the Iranians, by the way, if you listen to their statements from time to time, they say, yeah, the US has aircraft carriers that they can project influence away from their borders. We have the proxies, the militias. And this is a public statement. I'm not putting words in their mouth. So this is how Hezbollah started. Now, there was one issue in Lebanon when they started Hezbollah. Lebanon was not no one's property. Lebanon was the property of the dictator of Syria, Hafiz Assad. He had his troops inside, he was running the show, so the Iranians clashed with the Syrians. Now, Assad, the father, the son is too dumb, but the father was really skillful and savvy. So the father played Iran versus Iraq and the Arabs. And he conceded to the highest bidder, you know, okay, you want my service, what do you give me in return? So along these lines, he came to terms with the Iranians that, okay, I'll let you have Hezbollah here, but, you know, you give me, and he had a list of maybe oil and money and support and you name it. The point is, Hezbollah was in Lebanon under the Assad permission, and supervision. It was not independent. That's very important for later on. In 1990, after the Gulf War and the end of the Cold War, and the region was changing and everyone was changing camps, Lebanon ended its civil war, and the Lebanese parliament amended the constitution, and they issued a general pardon. Every militia in Lebanon had to concede its arms, disband, and the fighters would get pardoned, so no one would go to prison or to court. Now, this would have affected Hezbollah, and Hezbollah wanted a justification to keep its arms. How? Israel. So, let's fight Israel. So they called themselves resistance to justify keeping their arms. They said, well, the Constitution stipulates disbanding all militias, but we're not a militia. What are we? Resistance. And that's why they started using the word resistance, and they kept their militia. Assad found it a good way to keep this going because he used this militia to blackmail Israel, to blackmail America. Anytime Clinton wouldn't give Assad an appointment to see him, Hezbollah fires rockets into Israel. Israel says this has to stop. America calls Assad. This was a brilliant way for Assad to keep leverage over the US, Israel, everybody else. Now, another thing would happen. Assad, the father would die. Assad, the son, comes in. Assad, the son, is too stupid that he didn't understand how to walk on the fence and play both sides against one another. He ended up throwing himself in the laps of the Ayatollahs and the mullahs of Iran. And this is when he lost leverage. Assad, the son, who's currently in power, came to power in Syria in the year 2000. By 2005, he had been ejected from Lebanon. His father had stayed in Lebanon for over 21 years. He left Lebanon in 5 years with a Security Council resolution approved by the US and France, which is usually, the friend of Assad and Hezbollah. So when Assad, the son, was ejected, Hezbollah became a militia with no supervision. And because there was, Assad was not there anymore, Hezbollah took over Lebanon. So they were transformed from a militia that was under some sort of regional supervision to their own thing. And this is when Iran came up with the idea that, okay, now we have a militia that controls Lebanon. Why not replicate the experiment? Why not have a militia that controls Bahrain and a militia that controls Yemen, another one that, Syria and Iraq, wherever you can find Shia or wherever you can convert people to Shia, Sunnis to Shia, why not? The more the merrier. So the reason I'm telling you this is because Hezbollah has been at the heart of putting this axis of resistance together. It was the first model that succeeded, and it was being replicated. The second country where Hezbollah was being replicated was Iraq. The Iraq, Saddam was removed. There was vacuum, power vacuum. No one was in charge. And Hezbollah started replicating itself in Iraq. Literally, they sent Hezbollah fighters and leaders from Lebanon to Iraq who trained and armed and organized and just copied the whole thing. And the next was Bahrain, and after that they connected with Yemen. So this is what we call the axis of resistance. And each one of those we call the Iran proxy. It's one of the Iranian arms. Now, former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, I think he was the one who came up with the image. He said, this is an octopus, Iran being the head of the octopus, and each one of the militias is an arm. And we have to cut the arms and deal with the head. So what you see now is that Israel is dealing with the arms, dealt with the first arm, Hamas, now almost done with the second arm. But before we move on to Israel, these militias have been, in the case of Hezbollah, they've been so successful that they have extracted so many concessions, first and foremost from America. By the way, we always focus on Hezbollah versus Israel, but Hezbollah has been a very potent network. Number one, in money laundering throughout Africa and South America. Number two, in trafficking illicit material, drugs and Captagon and all kinds of stuff. So this organization, we have a investigation that was published by Politico, I think 7 years ago, that showed how the Obama administration reached out to Tehran to ask them to rein in Hezbollah's drug trade in South America. Just to give you an idea how far and wide Hezbollah has spread. And Iran started using them everywhere to hit wherever they wanted. And they did the same in Yemen. Avi explained to you that Yemen has 35% who are not Sunni tribes. Now, they call them Shia. They're not exactly Shia. They're very close. They're called the Zaydis. They're very close, but they're not exactly Shia, but they're good enough. So these guys, Iran reached out to them and he said, look, everyone here is against you. We can be your friends. We will give you missiles. We will give you whatever you want. And this was during the time when the Arab Spring was going on. And in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, Houthis started going after the government. This is where America made a huge mistake at the time. This was the Obama administration. If you remember a guy whose name was John Brennan, he was the chief of the CIA. I think at the time he was still what we call the czar of terrorism under Obama. And he came up with the idea that in Yemen we are fighting the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And this was an organization that was headed by a US citizen who had grown up here in Virginia, Anwar al-Awlaqi, if you ever heard his name. This is the only terrorist that America took out using a drone. Because, you know, when it's the case of an American citizen, we have to go to court, but this was an exception. We took him out when he was in Yemen. Anyway, he set up this Al-Qaeda operation in Yemen, and then John Brennan came with the idea, why not unleash the non-Sunnis, these Houthis, why not unleash them on Al-Qaeda, and that be a win-win? And then Iran will be happy because we're trying to make Iran happy because we want Iran to disband its nuclear weapon. What could possibly go wrong if you unleash these guys? So I think now we know the answer. These are the Houthis. They went after Al-Qaeda. They went after the government of Yemen. They ejected the government of Yemen. They took over government. They took over all of Yemen. The Saudis tried to rein them in, started a war, aerial bombardment campaign. Of course, in this town, we went against Saudi Arabia instead of giving them a hand. And then the Saudis stopped, and they stopped because we literally stopped sending them or selling them bombs that they can use to hit the Houthis. And the last month before he left office, Secretary Mike Pompeo added the Houthis to the Foreign Terrorist Organization at the State Department. The first month, or the second month of the Biden administration, February of 2021, the first thing that Secretary Antony Blinken did was he removed the Houthis from the terrorism list. And their argument was that, you know, they're the government and they're feeding the people, and if we keep them as terrorists, then we can't feed the people. People will go hungry. Okay, so we removed them. And then the Saudis thought, okay, now if America is not going to give a hand with going after the Houthis, then, you know, we probably should stop. And then the Saudis sued for peace. They told the Houthis, okay, you win, ceasefire, you stay. Of course, this was a victory for the Houthis. It was a victory for Iran. Now, when October 7 happened, you probably know this, when October 7 happened, the Houthis decided to start targeting ships that they said were on their way to Israel. Now, mind you, Israel gets a fraction of shipping that goes through Bab el-Mandeb, which is this strait that connects the Indian Ocean to the Red Sea on the south. That corner, that's where Yemen is. Israel gets a fraction, but the main bulk of world trade goes through this strait, and it goes all the way north, the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal, in Mediterranean, Europe, and the US, sometimes the US. So they started hitting shipping lanes, the Houthis, and they said, we're doing this in support of Hamas, and we will only stop when Israel stops its war on Hamas, just the same way that Hezbollah started a war on Israel until Israel stopped the war on Hamas. When this happened, the economists in this room would know, prices of commodities worldwide went up, insurance for shipping went up, prices went up, inflation went up. So all of it is connected. So this hurt everyone. In the US Constitution, any US president can go to war without consulting Congress in one case. And that's when they protect the sea shipping lanes. This is the reason why we designed the Marines to start with, so many, 200 years ago. So President Biden had the authority to go after the Houthis without even consulting with Congress, which he did. And he put together a coalition of 10 states, mainly the states that have big shipping companies, Denmark, for example, or maybe Germany. A coalition of 10 states. Only one of them is Arab, Bahrain. Bahrain, they're nice. Whatever we ask them to do, they do. They're a very small country. They asked Saudi Arabia, they asked the United Arab Emirates, and they said, you've been at war with the Houthis for the past 5 years before you stopped a year ago or 2 years ago. Now is your chance. We're going after your enemies. Come join us, and we'll go after the Houthis. What did the Saudis and the Emiratis say? Thanks, but no thanks. We're not coming in. And you might wonder why. I wondered why at this time. I asked the Saudis and the Emiratis, and they said, we're not sure the Americans are there to stay. They probably do this as a maneuver and get out. And if they get out, and if we get in and they get out, we get stuck with an animosity that we tried hard to stop. Lo and behold, 3 months into the fight, we reached out to Iran through Oman, through third party, indirect channel. And we asked the Iranians to rein in the Houthis in return for us, America, releasing Iranian funds frozen in bank accounts somewhere in South Korea. And the Saudis at the time, my friends, they called me, see, that's why we didn't go in. So the word I'm looking for here in our US foreign policy is consistency. And we're inconsistent, and if we're inconsistent, no one will bet on us. And if they don't bet on us, they will not do what we ask them to do. So this is how the proxy operation works. And they do the same thing in Iraq. So Iran, and by the way, I think yesterday after the killing of Nasrallah, the Iranian proxies in Iraq, the ones that Hezbollah tried to replicate, but Iraq is a complicated country that they couldn't replicate it as they wanted. They organized a protest all the way to the US Embassy. Of course, you probably might know, but we just reinforced our embassies, sent the Marines enforcement to embassies in Beirut and Damascus, and not Damascus, I'm sorry, we don't have an embassy in Damascus, Baghdad and Beirut. So the point here is that Iran always uses these proxies to blackmail America. Now, let's move to Iraq. In Iraq, the population is probably 24 million. Half of these are Shia, roughly. So 12, right? 12 million. If you compare Iraq to Lebanon, Lebanon is 4 million Lebanese. Only 1.5 million of them are Shia. The reason I'm giving you these numbers is for you to understand why it was easier for Iran to set up a proxy in Lebanon, but not in Iraq. In Lebanon, you have 1.5 million Shia. You can buy half of them, you can beat the other half, and that's it. You have Hezbollah. But do this with 12 million. Number one, Iran doesn't have the money to buy the 12 million. It doesn't have the power to beat the other Shia who don't join. On top of it, Iraq, as the second biggest exporter of oil in the world, in OPEC, not in the world, with 4 million barrels of oil exported a day, Iraq brings in $10 billion a month, and they spend $6, and they have a $4 billion surplus every month. So just that you get an idea how much money these people have. So Iraq has money. So Iran can't really use money to buy Iraqis. The government of Iraq is wealthier than the government of Iran in terms of cash and money. This is another obstacle why the Iran couldn't really put up a militia as formidable as Hezbollah of Lebanon in Iraq. But they still managed to get what they call Kata'ib Hezbollah, the Iraqi kind of Hezbollah. Another thing that they faced in Iraq when setting up the proxy was the enormous amount of corruption, not only in government, but in culture. Because Iran controls the government of Iraq, it forced the government of Iraq to allocate a yearly budget for these militias. So they're militias, but they're paid by the government. The annual budget is 3.2 billion. That's an enormous amount of money. And the number of fighters is only 100,000 fighters. Now, if you compare these numbers to any army, this army would be, the strongest, best armed army in the world, except that in Iraq, they're not. Now you're thinking, why? I mean, all this money, and they barely have a militia that they can account for. There's something that happens in Iraq that they call the ghost employment, that people register names and they get paid for these names, but these are people who do not exist or people who do not really work. So, and whoever registers them cashes the money. In the case of the militias, a militia chief shows up and he says, I pledge allegiance to Khamenei, and I'm having a militia, and my militia has 100 fighters, and these are 20 of them. And then the minister will say, okay, these are salaries for 100 fighters. There are only 20 of them. So the surplus gets into the pockets of these militia leaders. These militia leaders pledge allegiance to Iran and to the IRGC commanders. So the money goes all the way through these guys back to Iran. So Iraq has been one of the biggest loopholes of the US sanctioned regime on Iran. And if you're asking yourself, how come with all these sanctions, which are not enforced, by the way, under Biden, but when they were enforced under Trump, under maximum pressure that Trump placed on Iran, how come Iran survived? Well, they survived because they were using Iraq. And because no matter how much pressure we try to convince our government here in Washington, listen, guys, Iraq is a serious loophole. It's a lot of money that goes to Iran. It's a lot of militias that support Iran. We keep on calling it our ally, but we have to have a talk with these guys, except that we never have this talk. Why don't we have this talk with Iraq or with Lebanon, the government of Lebanon, or with the Yemen? Now, this is the main reason why we think we don't do that, is because Obama came up with the idea that if we get Iran integrated into the world economy, and these Iranians start, buying and selling, then they'll be nice guys. They'll become nice guys. And the nuclear deal was designed, and if you look up Obama's interviews, this is on the record, he said, the nuclear deal is not the end, it's only the beginning. It's a measure of building trust between us and the Iranians, after which we will build on it and become good friends. Now, except that the Iranians thought otherwise. The Iranians said, the deal is the end of the road, We gave you the deal, you give us the money. They took the money, they started funding Hezbollah and the militias. The reason why we don't confront the governments of Iraq or Lebanon and don't ask them to crack on these militias is because we are always hoping that if we behave nicely, if we in the US be nice to Hezbollah and the Iraqi Hezbollah and the Houthis, then the Iranians would recognize our good deed. And then the Iranians would think, look, Washington likes us, Washington recognizes our sphere of influence, so let's be nice with Washington. This is the premise that the US, the administration has in dealing with Iran and its proxies. Let me just, before I conclude, just come to where Israel comes in, of course. This is the most important part. We, in this country, are how many miles away? 6,000 miles away from Israel and the rest of the Middle East? 6,000 miles away? So whenever the rockets start flying, I mean, we can show sympathy, but, it's very far away. If you're in Israel, it's your existence at stake. If you're in America, it's politics. So the Israelis have a different outlook on these. The octopus, the arms of the octopus, we have to deal with these guys because, as Avi clearly explained to you, all of them are supposed to be going toward the Temple Mount, Quds al-Haram al-Sharif, whatever you want to call it. So to Israel, these groups are an existential threat. And Iran started stocking them up with all kinds of ballistic missiles, small missiles, explosive drones, with the idea that if there's a war one day, and this was the thinking before October 7, Israel was scared that if there's ever war, it'll come under an enormous amount of missiles that will overwhelm its air defenses. And once the air defenses are overwhelmed, whatever is over and above the amount fired will make it through, will hit targets inside of Israel, civilians, military, whatever it is. This is the basic logic of why Israel was kind of scared to deal with these guys. And Israel told us in the US this so many times. And then no, they'll never do it. The Iranians are rational, they calculate cost and effect. And lo and behold, one day on October 7th, they decided to do it. And you know the story. October 7th, Hamas burst out of Gaza. On October 8th, and by the way, someone asked me in the audience whether Hezbollah was aware beforehand whether Hamas was going in. We don't really know. I would say unlikely, only for Hamas to keep it secret, for surprise elements to surprise Israel. But whichever way it was, if you guys remember on October 7, Israel didn't reverse the tides instantly. It took at least up to 48 hours to stop the waves of Hamas still coming in. It took up to 72 hours to start pushing them back. It took up to 5 days to get the reserves to staging areas and drive the tanks and get the helicopters and whatnot. So the first 3 or 4 days, Hamas looked on top and Israel looked really weak. And to my mind, this is when Nasrallah thought, see, I told you, Israel was weak. He started throwing rockets on Israel on the north on October 8th. And Israel did not respond. Now, mind you, if this had happened any time that was not October 7, Israel would have probably driven all the way to Beirut. But Israel did not respond. Why? There's a long debate over what happened during that week. But what Israel ended up doing is that it focused on the south, and it kept engaging the north at the same intensity that Nasrallah has chosen. So don't go beyond 5-6 miles from the border, just small kind of fire or strikes. And this convinced Nasrallah that he was right. He got Israel on the ropes. He got a low-intensity warfare. He decided when to start it. He could decide when to end it, and he tied ending it to ending the war in Gaza. So it all added up. What happened eventually, as we now know, is that Israel eventually prevailed in Gaza, shifted its military weight north, and then the rest is history. Nasrallah is gone, and so is most of the leadership of Hezbollah, which now, as we speak, they're probably on the run. And the party can't muster to throw one rocket. I know that they're still throwing rockets in the north, but these are the smaller ones that don't really need a lot of expertise and command and stuff. So now what we see is that Israel hopefully has decapitated and taken down 2 proxies. While Avi was here on the podium, Israel also struck Hodeidah, because the Houthis have at least thrown 3 ballistic missiles on Israel. I think the third one was either yesterday or this morning. So Israel struck the airport of Hodeidah. There was a big fire. I don't have much details, but this is just to tell you that the Houthis, who are the third militia in line, who are trying to be in the picture, they might be next. Now, how will Israel deal with them? I'm no military expert. This said, the Houthis and the Iraqi militias are not as potent or dangerous or close or threatening to Israel. So Israel can really go to war with Iran even if the Houthis and the Iraqi militias are still in place. And I think this is the end game here. So the end game is that Iran versus Israel, if there is ever direct war between them. Now, one question that I keep on getting everywhere all the time, and it is, will Iran try to rescue Hezbollah? by engaging Israel in direct war? Will Iran try to help Hamas or rescue Hamas? The answer is no. And the reason I say no is that, like I explained, these militias were designed so that Iran doesn't have to fight a war face to face. If Iran has to fight war face to face, then why have these proxies to start with? So they were not designed for Iran to save them. They were designed for them to save Iran. And that's why I say no one is coming to Hezbollah's rescue. Now, what will happen is that if Israel takes its eye off the ball, which I doubt in Lebanon, if the Lebanese government doesn't step up, if Washington doesn't encourage the Gulf countries and the Lebanese government to step up to fill the void after Hezbollah, and the war stops, what will happen next is that Iran will try hard to fill the void, to reconstitute Hezbollah. It will not be easy, but this is the next step for the Iranians, and they will not go to war with Israel. What Israel will do is that now that the north is kind of clear, there's not a big threat from the north, now that Hamas is almost beaten, not a lot of threats from Hamas, now is the time to go after any targets inside of Iran if Israel wants. And I'm not in the military and I'm not Israeli, but I hear from Israeli friends that they have plans for this. Now the question is, this is something that needs more than plans. It needs the US to be signing on such a move. Why? It's not because the US will have to be dragged into this war. I firmly believe if there's ever war between Israel and Iran, Israel can prevail without the US getting involved. And this is mainly because there's no land border. The distance is long. It's only about air raids versus missiles. So I don't think, unlike what you hear all the time, escalation and World War III, there's no World War III. And Iran will never fight. To the Iranian regime, number one priority is the survival of the regime. Anything else comes later. So Iran will not go to war. We killed Soleimani, they didn't do anything. Israel took out Haniya in Tehran in the presidential compound. They've been talking about revenge until now. So these guys do not fight. These guys sent Hezbollah and Hamas to fight. I think at this point they've got a sense of reality. They've got a sense of how much of a paper tiger is this Hezbollah and this Hamas and the resistance of the axis of resistance. I think they did. I'm not sure how much of it they will internalize, whether this will change their policy. This is my final statement before we go to Q&A. I think Israel has achieved a major victory against Hezbollah over the last 12 days. They're on the level of the 1967 defeat of Nasser. That's how big they are. Over the past 20 years, the main theme had been that Israel cannot use its military force to impose its political will on anything connected to Iran or any one of its proxies. That no matter what Israel does, these will rebound and revive, and they'll come back, and Israel can't force its will. Now, these past 12 days, this whole script has been flipped upside down. And with Hezbollah on the run, Iran is, probably running for the exits because they're scared that Khamenei might be targeted. I think now is the time that Washington, especially we in this country, that we revise our thinking about asymmetric warfare. This is the first time a regular army crushes militias, literally crushes. And Israel gave a preview to the US after October 7. The Iraqi pro-Iran militias started targeting our US bases in Iraq. We don't have many bases, only 2, and we don't have heavy arms. We only have, like guys with A16 or M16, whatever they're called. So they started targeting the bases. And we, America, of course, being the nice superpower, we started hitting their empty buildings as a warning. And they didn't stop. And then we consulted with Israel. And Israel said, that's easy, take out the big guy. So we waited for the top 3 commanders of Kata'ib Hezbollah, the main Iranian militia in Iraq. And boom, Hellfire missile out of nowhere. 3 of them were killed. They stopped. 0. No more attacks on US base. So this is how these guys think. And this is what we're not doing with the Houthis, We've been striking, radars or whatever they are in the middle of nowhere. The Houthis are literally a militia on donkeys, literally donkeys. They carry missiles on donkeys. And our 6th Fleet can't deal with them, can't keep the shipping lanes open. And the reason why is because, and by the way, this was in the New York Times, not from me. The New York Times quoted a senior source in the Biden administration as saying, we're not escalating with the Houthis because we're scared that an escalation will lead to a regional war and a bigger war and stuff. And if you're thinking like I'm thinking now, why not take the heads of the Houthis? Save the money, save the time. Go after Abdul Malik Badruddin al-Houthi, he's the chief. Go after him, go after number 2. We can do it, we have the intel, we have the capacity. And then see and wait what these guys will do. I'm sure they will stop, just like I said, they stopped in Iraq. But this is the point. This is where politics comes in. This is where all the talking heads on TVs and CNN, and this is where all the editorials in the Washington Post and the New York Times come in. And everyone started saying, you remember this, when we took out Soleimani, everyone started saying World War III. I was one of the voices. I said, I promise you, there'll never be war with Iran over this. And of course, when I do this, I'm just taking my whole reputation. If there was war at the time, I would have, been shown as crazy. So that's the story of the axis of resistance and the Iran and the proxies and whatever name you want to use for them. Thank you very much.
Awesome. That's so good. So there's a lot of questions, and they run on, I think, basically 2 themes. First, the idea and the worry and the issues about Iran and their nuclear capabilities and how that enters into everything that you've spoken about. And the second one is how, with the but the cutting of the arms off, what happens to these areas? What's, the day after? What's going to happen in Gaza? What's going to happen in Lebanon? I think you spoke about that a little bit. But what are the possibilities of what's going to happen?
Well, great questions. 2 separate questions. The first one about the nuclear. One thing about nuclear is that it's about knowledge. It's not about the physical space. So even if we or the Israelis take out the facilities, we still have an issue of the Iranians reconstituting their program. And that's why in these cases, you beat them hard and you keep an eye on them. That's one way of doing it. You take out the facilities, you wait. If they try to reconstitute, you strike again. The other way of doing it was to get Iran to agree to what they call the additional protocol in the nuclear agreements. That the point is that no country in the world, except for the 5 who officially have nuclear weapons, the 5 big countries, and there are 3 who are not recognized, but they have them anyway, including Pakistan and India. The idea is that you cannot enrich your own uranium. No country can do that. If you want your uranium, you go to the IAEA. And the IAEA will find you a country that will give you, and you can use whatever you want for civil use or energy or medicine or whatnot. Iran started setting up its nuclear facility. Now, mind you, they did not the principle is that if you start setting up a facility, you have to inform IEA beforehand. You say, okay, we're setting up a facility. This is the dimensions. This is the goal. What Iran did was that they did not tell us about what they were setting up. And there's an opposition organization in Iran. It's sort of a cult, so to speak. It's called Mujahideen Khalq, for those who know who these guys are. And Mujahideen Khalq have influence inside of Iran. Mujahideen Khalq came to us under Obama and they showed us the pictures and they said, this is the nuclear facility that Iran is building. And I think President Obama at the time went out in public and he showed the pictures, and that was that. And we started imposing sanctions that bite, if you remember the slogan that we added to the sanctions. And we kept on pressuring Iran until we get them to sign that miserable deal. Now, the reason I say a miserable deal is that Khamenei came up, he invented an idea that nation states have a right to enrich. He said Iran has the right to enrich uranium. Now, the reason he says that is that because he thinks that he's on par with the US and Russia and Iran, that if these guys had the right to exist, then we have the right to exist. That's not how it works, but anyway, he came up with the idea. We conceded. So the US conceded, said, okay, we'll give you that, but you'll have to do it within these limits and within. The limits were horrible. You know, the breakout time would have been easy. There were many sunset clauses that would have, expired and they'd be doing things legally. Anyway, but like I told you, Obama thought this would be only the appetizer, and after that we'll be allies. And if we're allies, it doesn't matter if our ally builds a nuclear weapon. Now, all of this is history now and false. To the question of the militias, all of these militias, and regimes, by the way, including Iran, there are no institutions. They're built around one person, usually five, but just like one person. If you take out this one person, the militia's gone. Now, I'm sure all of you hear the slogan that you can't defeat the idea. You can't defeat Hamas because Hamas is an idea. And the answer to this is, where is the Iraqi Ba'ath Party? Show it to me. After we defeated Saddam. Where's Al-Qaeda after we killed bin Laden? Show me Al-Qaeda. It's not true. We can defeat a militia. You just take out, the top guy. And in the case of Hezbollah and Hamas, Israel has not only taken out the top guy in case of Hezbollah, not yet Hamas, hopefully soon. But the 30 top leaders in the chain of command after Nasrallah have been taken out. So now who runs this thing, who runs this organization? I think if the Lebanese government steps up and instructs what's remained of Hezbollah now to surrender its arms to the Lebanese military, they'll do it. They're too weak and they can't say no. Israeli pressure is too big. But this is a question of what happens next. Now, this has been the question for every war that we've had. The biggest failure, of course, has been Iraq, We went in, decapitated the regime, took out Saddam, but we did not think of what to do next. And by the way, I think eventually President Bush fixed it, I think the best piece of foreign policy was the surge of troops, if you remember this, what this means. We sent more troops, we connected with the Sunni tribes, and we got levels of violence in 2011 down to pre-2003 levels. So Iraq was working. And then Bush handed it over to Obama, and Obama said, oh, great, it's working, I'm going out. And the minute we went out, Iran came in. So that's the story of Iraq. So long story short, I think with minimum thinking of what to do the moment that you behead Hamas or behead Hezbollah, and by the way, in the case of Hamas, we know there are plans, the UAE is on board, the people who will succeed Hamas, whether it's Salam Fayyad or Mohammed Dahlan, are ready in the wings. Budget is ready. We know everything. We're just waiting for the final end of Sinwar.
I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Hussein, thank you so much. And we are now moving to our next session. We talked a lot yesterday and today, here and there. We mentioned the whole issue of the concept of caliphate, and we talked about the issue of Sunni Islam. Here and there we mentioned Egypt. And so now it's a great opportunity and a great pleasure for me to introduce Dalia Ziadeh, our next speaker. Dalia is expert in the whole issue of political Islam, the Muslim Brotherhood, Egypt, and she will share with us her thoughts and perspective. Dalia, thank you.
Thank you, Abu. Okay, good. Here? Okay, thank you. All right, thank you for the applause. Beforehand, I appreciate it. And I hope I can help you today understand why radical Islamists are not only a threat to us who are living in the Middle East, but they are also a threat to you here in the United States. And actually, they are already succeeding in kind of occupying the United States, the same way they planned for about 20, even, oh my God, 40 years ago. In the 1990s, they planned, about 30 years ago, they planned to occupy the United States in their own way through soft power. And right now, it seems they have already started succeeding in doing so. But before I start getting into the academic part, I would like just to say that what I'm going to speak about today is not only the scholars' stuff. It's not only the things that you will read in books, but I'm speaking from a hands-on experience. I lived in Egypt my whole life, as you know. I have engaged in several battles, hand-to-hand, with radical Islamists, either from the Salafist groups, the far-right groups, or particularly the Muslim Brotherhood, who eventually were able to force me to get out of my homeland. So I think at the beginning I was really angry that this happened, but I think this happened for a reason. And when I came here, I knew this reason is that this is not only a war that is limited to what is going there, it's all of our war. And today, hopefully, I will help you understand how to fight this war as just ordinary persons. You don't need to be officials or activists to do that. So let's start. Okay. So, as you can see in this photo is from Iran, for a group of youth in Iran who were making protests, and they have just decided in the protest to burn the American flag. Because as they say, America is a big Satan, and Israel is a small Satan. And together, it's their mission to fight both of them. But guess what? Iran is not the only place where the American flag is being burned. There is another place. This place, unfortunately, is the United States. Only two places in the world where you can see the American flag is being burned these days: Iran and its proxies, and the United States. This photo you are seeing is outside the Union Station in Washington. Just 2 months ago or 3 months ago, when Prime Minister Netanyahu was here speaking at the Congress. A group of young people who are protesting for the Palestinian people in Gaza and who are sympathizing with the misery that's happening in Gaza decided to make some protests against Netanyahu. But actually, they didn't make the protest against Israel or against Netanyahu. They brought down the flag that was above the Union Station and put in the American flag. They put down the American flag and put instead on the same post the Palestinian flag. And they took the American flag, humiliated it in the ways that you're seeing, and burned it, and kept dancing around it with the Palestinian flag. The scene we are seeing here, unfortunately, I don't know how it was tolerated by the American government or the American people as a form of free speech. Honestly, I'm not an American, and I was offended that this happened, because I know who are the people who are behind this and why they are doing this. So what you're seeing in this scene, what you're seeing happening right now in the United States is the manifestation of something called the strategic plan of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. It's a plan that they wanted to achieve in Canada and the United States. And the goal of this plan is simply sabotaging America from within. How they are sabotaging America from within? By abusing the open society and the privilege of free speech in Western capitals, including, of course, the United States, to spread radicalism as a form of free speech. This, what you can see here right now, is the strategic plan. And actually, it's not my own discovery. It was discovered by the FBI during the investigations that happened after 9/11. They tracked the people whom they were suspicious are related to the 9/11 attacks. And in the house of one of the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood in the US, they found this document. As you can see, this document is published in 1991. It's not published, it was distributed among the members of the group here in the United States who were living here, and who, by the way, had to leave the Middle East at that time because they were chased by other countries who adopted Islamist ideologies different to them, like Saudi Arabia, for example, that adopted the Wahhabist ideology, and others, and Egypt also, which was at that time on the communist socialist side. And they came here to the United States just to make their dream come true by building their own caliphate on the ruins of the American state and the Western civilization. And to show you how critical, I want the document, okay? To show you how critical and shocking the way they're thinking is, I want to, and actually to show you how they are exactly applying their dream right now, I want to read with you some parts of their document, their memo about how to destroy the West and build their own Islamic caliphate. The translation is made officially by by the FBI as well. So. So, as we mentioned, first it was published in 1991. So it's not new, it's an old plan and they have been working on it. So what the plan says? The plan says is that it was written at the time actually when the Muslim Brotherhood, there was some kind of what they called an Islamic activism, an Islamic momentum in the Western communities that they can use to capitalize on and use to achieve their goal of settlement, or al-Tawtin. Al-Tawtin actually, it shouldn't be translated in English as settlement. I would call it embodiment, is to get as piece and parcel of the American society and then sabotage it from within. So this dream of embodiment or settlement, as it is mentioned here, what it means. For them, it has 3 stages. First, settlement, which according to their text, it is that Islam and its movement become a part of the homeland it lives in. It become a part of America. That Islam turns into firmly rooted organizations on whose basis civilizations, structure, and testimony are built. Then they do something called rooting in the process of settlement, or tawtin. The rooting is that Islam is resident, becomes resident of the United States, and not a bathing thing, or rooted, entrenched in the soil of the spot where it moves and not strange plan to it. And the process of settlement has a goal, and the goal is that the movement must plan and struggle to obtain the keys and the tools of this process to carry out this grand mission as a civilization jihadist. Civilization jihadist means they want to establish the civilization of jihad here in the United States as part of the new ideology here. And here is the most dangerous part. In the same memo, when you go down, you will find that they are explaining what they mean by civilian jihadist, civilization jihadist process. They say, understanding the role of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America, the process of settlement or tawteen or embodiment is a civilization jihadist process with all the word means. The Ikhwan, or the Muslim Brotherhood, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad. And jihad means the holy war. It's a kind of a jihad, holy war, in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers so that it is eliminated. They want to eliminate the Western civilization so that it is eliminated, and God's religion, which is Islam, is made victorious over all other religions. This is exactly what we are seeing happening right now. This is exactly what the Muslim Brotherhood are achieving right now by mobilizing people under the flag of fighting for or standing up for the situation in the Middle East or supporting the people in Gaza, but actually their goal is jihad and sabotaging America from within. Yeah, we'll go back now to the slides and we will try to answer the question of why this is the case, why the Muslim Brotherhood are so obsessed with destroying the American civilization. And as we go back to the slide, I want just to mention something really interesting, is how Muslim votes has become so influential in American elections these days. Because if we look at the numbers, we will be surprised by how these numbers are, the numbers of Muslim voters, I mean, are a very low percentage compared to the majority of voters. For example, actually, the total number of Muslims in America are about 3,450,000 people. Those who are registered to vote are about 1.5 million, compared to actually a total of 168 million Americans who are registered to vote, which means the Muslim voters are hardly 1% of this number. So why they are so influential? Simply because they started to apply this plan, join other movements, embody themselves inside the American society so they can destroy it from within. And the best example for that is what we saw actually happened in the past few years as they joined the woke movement, which disagrees with them on everything, ideologically, politically, and everything, but they found it a good opportunity to get into the middle of this woke movement and then represent themselves as the most liberal ones who can accept, for example, people from the LGBT community to be friends with, to be part of the same movement, who can join the Black American people in their fight for more rights and so on, and thus appear as people fighting for democratization and human rights. But in reality, they are just taking advantage of the momentum. And when the time came, here we are now. We found the same people from the woke movement supporting the Islamists right now in their quest to practice anti-Semitism and target the Jewish people under the name of fighting for the people in Gaza or standing up for the people in Gaza. There are 3 moments in our recent history that empowered the sabotage plan by the radical Islamists. The first point happened in 9/11 in the early 2000s, and it was also around the time of the second Intifada. 9/11 happened here in the United States. The second Intifada was happening there in the Middle East. American Islamists in the United States here abused this moment for their advantage. They capitalized on the reactions of the people who were very scared about this religion they did not know much about, and that they have seen that it actually threatens their lives. And Al-Qaeda, that was the representatives of this religion at the time, are the ones who destroyed the towers, are the ones who attacked the trade towers in New York, and thus, well, people started to fear anything, any person who is Muslim, anything related to Islam. But actually not the moderate ones who were able to speak at the time. Unfortunately, we found, and I was watching from the Middle East at that time, and I was so shocked that organizations like CARE, for example, like all the radical Islamist organizations are the ones who were invited by the White House, by the American administration to speak on behalf of the Muslims and educate the American public about the Muslims. And of course, this empowered them, empowered the wrong people. The second moment that empowered the sabotage plan inside America is the BDS campaign and the Arab Spring. The BDS campaign happened here at American campuses, and the Arab Spring was happening almost at the same time in the Middle East. At that time, actually, the youth here and the youth there capitalized on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And actually, this is an old game, as we will explain later, that the Islamists found ripe for them to use in order to gain legitimacy for their evil causes and also recruit supporters. And they were very clever in doing this over years. The third moment that actually was even more and more empowering to the sabotage plan is the October 7 attack. The October 7 attack happened in the Middle East. And people thought, okay, the reactions should be, or most of us expected that at least the Western world will take the side of Israel. Even if Arabs took the side of Hamas because, well, they have their reasons to do so, either because they are pressured by their mainstream audience or they are or trying to abuse the momentum also for their own political advantage. It was so shocking at the time that also in Western capitals, they took the side of Hamas. They refused to stand by the side of Israel. The United Nations took 80 days after October 7 attack happened to condemn the raping of Israeli women on October 7. Why it needed to wait for 80 days to do that? Would it be the case? Would it have been the case if the other country that was attacked was any country other than Israel? For sure, yes. But because it is Israel, they were so hesitant. They sought many times because they also fear those Arab allies and Islamist allies who, like, for example, Qatar, Iran, and others who put a lot of money, unfortunately, in the United Nations, in other academic institutions in Western countries and they are using this economic leverage to silence people in the West from taking the right positions on what's happening in the Middle East. And even worse, after that, there was a sense that what's happening in the Middle East is the problem of the Middle East. It's not the problem of the West anymore. Even the United States, who has always been a strong ally to Israel, all of a sudden, it took the side of someone who's watching from distance. It didn't want to get involved appropriately in supporting Israel in this struggle against Hamas. But thank God, Israel does not need this anymore, and it is now helping itself and helping Arab countries to get over the nightmare of terrorist organizations in the region. So these are the three moments, the three big moments that are now empowering Islamists in the United States and leading to the terrible scenes we are seeing here right now. This takes us to the very important question of why Islamists want to destroy the West, why they are targeting the United States in particular, what they are going to benefit from it, why they hate democracy and human rights and women's rights so much. So to understand this, we need to differentiate between Islam and Islamism, and between Muslims and Islamists. And I made this table, of course, it's like very simple one. These issues has been studied in depth by scholars for many years, but I tried to summarize it here. So basically, Islam is a religious ideology. It's a belief that existed just to regulate the society, that for people to pray in a certain way or worship God in a certain way. This is a religious ideology. Islamism actually is mainly a political ideology. It's not a religious ideology. It's a political ideology that is twisting Islam, the religion, with varied degrees to fit into certain political narratives that serve certain power groups. Islam as a religion is the same for all Muslims or all Muslim majority countries. It's the same religion everywhere, but Muslims, by the way, are not the same everywhere. In contrast, Islamism is coherent and consistent across all borders and all cultures. Islamists know each other, they have the same ideology, they don't adapt or change their practice of Islam or jihad under the flag of Islam based on where they live or the politics or foreign policy of their country, because first of all, they don't acknowledge the idea of nation states. They don't acknowledge the fact that we are divided, or we have our own national countries and national affiliations. For them, all Muslims should belong to the same Muslim Ummah. And in this Muslim Ummah, we are all ruled by Sharia, and Muslims should even rule over non-Muslims by this Sharia. Some people think that in Muslim majority countries, actually, Islam is the one, is a factor that determines politics and foreign policy, but actually it is the opposite. Politics and foreign policy goals are the factors that define how Islam is practiced in each country. And actually, if you look at the Arab countries, it's really interesting how the change of their domestic politics over time has changed how they practice Islam. In Egypt, for example, after the fall of the Muslim Brotherhood in 2013, our media went on speaking about a new trend of Islam that they called the Egyptian Islam. And it was so funny because since when Islam has a nationality, since when we have a Turkish Islam, an Egyptian Islam, a Syrian Islam, this was very new. But actually, after that, it seems like more and more Arab countries like the idea. A few years after that, around the year 2020, after the signing of the Abraham Accords, we found that the United Arab Emirates too started to speak about its trend of Islam. And they called it the Emirati form of Islam, which is, they promote it as more tolerant, more open to other religions, and so on. So the change of domestic policies has already changed how Islam is being practiced. And not only that, but also the change of the foreign policies of Arab countries has changed how Islam is being used to speak or to deal with other countries. And take, for example, the issue of anti-Semitism, the issue of how Arab countries are practicing anti-Semitism under the flag of Islam. So first of all, I mean, before 1950s, 1960s, before Gamal Abdel Nasser comes in power and anti-Semitism becomes a trend in the Arab region, no one spoke badly about the Jewish people. No one, actually, the Jewish people were living in our Arab countries. I mean, some of them were Arabs. I'm not sure if this is a correct definition, like Arab Jews. They lived in Arab countries. They built the Arab economies. They were citizens of these countries. And they were living next to Muslims, to Christians, and nobody ever dared to come out with holy texts speaking about the need to fight against the Jewish people, or all the horrible texts we're reading now about the need for all Muslims to fight against all Jews and all this nonsense. These texts, these so-called holy texts, started to appear only around 1970s and 1980s, when the Egyptian and Arab regimes at that time thought that they needed to offer a justification for their public on why they need to practice anti-Semitism based on religious reasons against Israel, against the Jewish people. So only at that time, these holy texts started to come up. And only at that time, radical Islamist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists found a great tool, which is anti-Semitism, under the flag of Islam, under the holy texts, to use against Israel and against the Jewish people. And at that time, actually marked the birth of Hamas. And most of the terrorist organizations that you've been seeing wreaking havoc in the region right now, it was built around that time. And actually, this takes us to a very important point here, is that political Islamism is not only practiced by radical Islamists, by groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists and so. In reality, political Islamism is also practiced by states. It has a formal form. Al-Azhar in Egypt, for example, is a form of political Islamism. It's given certain messages that they fabricate into, or give it like an Islamic cover, and then give to the general public, and try to convince the general public that it is a divine order, while actually it's a state policy, or something the state wants the people to be affected by during this time. So political Islamism exists on the formal level as much as it exists on the grassroots level in the form of these organizations. But before we get to this point, I would like you to look at this spectrum, because actually not all Muslims are the same. It's true Islam and Islamist is a more complicated issue, but not all Muslims are the same. We have on this spectrum from the right to the left, the jihadists, they are the most extreme ones, the far right. Under this group, you can see groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and even the Salafists, who are not yet carrying weapons, but they are ready to do that. Then the political Islamists, and these political Islamists are groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, in Egypt and some other Arab countries. And then the former Islamists, which are the Islamic institutions that belong to states and run by states, like Al-Azhar in Egypt, for instance. And then the moderate Muslims and Sufis, and eventually liberal Islamists on the far left. The only difference between these two groups, we can actually divide them from here, from the middle here. The most interesting difference between them is that all those who are on the left are the ones who value individualism, versus those who are on the right are the ones who value collectiveness. The idea of the collective. We are waging jihad for the collective, for the Islamic Ummah. While the liberal Muslims, or even the moderate Muslims, are more about individual rights, about their individual relationship with God. That's why you will see that these radicals, the radical groups, are actually the ones who are more organized, more well-funded. They work together very coherently. They know exactly what they are doing. They have a strategy. While all the people on the left, who are the majority, by the way, they are not the minority of Muslims. They are the majority of the Muslims. And by the way, I belong to the very far left here, the liberal Muslims, myself. These are the people who are not organized at all, because once again, they look at the practice of Islam as an individual practice. They don't need to get into groups. But I think it's a mistake, because actually the best way to fight against radical Islamists is not by, I don't know, some group coming from the United States, the West Europe, or any other religion, for example, to fight against them. But actually, if we empower the moderate Muslims and the liberal Muslims to fight against radical Islamists, help them get organized, help them get well-funded into groups that can really make a difference. It can really make a huge difference. So the political Islamists, this point is very important. We spoke about the formal Islamists. Political Islam in general is practiced by the state and also practiced by grassroots groups. It's very interesting when you look at groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists, how they started. They started as a reaction to the corruption of the formal political Islamists, to the formal states, to the Muslim Brotherhood, for example. It appeared in the 1920s as a reaction to the liberal and open life in Cairo. And the Muslim Brotherhood did not start in the capital city of Cairo. It started in a very small city in Ismailia, which is a city very close to, a city on the Red Sea, actually, very close to Israel, ironically. And it's on the east of Egypt. A very small city where people feel marginalized. They cannot keep up with the city lights in Cairo, which was full of, art and culture and liberal politicians speaking all the time. So Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, went to them and said, okay, I have an idea to empower you. He spoke with the grassroots citizen and said, I have an idea to empower you. Forget about this liberal life in Cairo that you want to be part of. Let's do jihad. Let's be pious Muslims. Let's get organized into a group called the Muslim Brothers, and we fight together, and we spread the word of Islam, and when we spread the word of Islam, we will become the masters of those liberals who live in Cairo. And from there, the Muslim Brotherhood movement started by giving the grassroots citizen a political promise that they can be better than the liberals. Ironically, the Salafists started in the same way also. They started in reaction to, not in reaction, but they started as capitalizing on the culture that Egyptians got from their work in Gulf countries, especially Saudi Arabia, where Wahhabism and Salafism was very strong at that time in the 1970s and the 1980s after the discovery of oil, and these Gulf countries has become so rich. So most Egyptian youth at that time traveled there to work, and they, of course, saw a very closed and conservative life. And these people, despite being very closed and conservative, they have nothing of the open life we have in Cairo or Egypt. But still, they are more wealthy, they have more welfare, they don't have to work hard to get money, they have the money. So actually, at that time, the Salafism, the Salafist movement started giving people, the grassroots citizens, the economic promise that if we became as conservative as Saudi Arabia, if we suppress women, if we prevent women from going to work, making them dress in a certain way, practice religion in a very strict way, like the Wahhabist version of Islam, we will be rich, we will be good economically. And unfortunately, many people followed them. Even Hamas started as a grassroots movement offering a revolutionary approach that is covered with an Islamic cover. Hamas represented itself as a resistance for what they called the occupation. And they promised that they are doing this in order to fight the Jewish people, whom the Prophet Muhammad said that, and they dug deep actually into holy texts, and they brought some texts and said that we are here to fight against the people whom the Prophet Muhammad called that they should be killed in order for the Messiah to come and the world become a better place. And hence, at that moment, in the 1980s when Hamas was born, this was the moment when the Israeli-Palestinian conflict turned from being a territorial conflict or maybe an Arab-Israeli conflict into a religious conflict. And thus, with all these three layers, I believe actually over time, as you can see now, we somehow resolved the Arab-Israeli conflict. Honestly, I don't think what we are seeing today in the Middle East is an Arab-Israeli conflict anymore. The Arab-Israeli conflict has ended. What we're seeing is an Iranian-Israeli conflict, or let's say an Iran versus the West conflict on the chessboard of the Middle East. The Arab-Israeli conflict has ended with the signing of the Abraham Accords a few years ago. And most of the Arab countries today, they don't want even to cut the relationship with Israel, despite all the condemnations and media statements and so, but they're still keeping the relationship with Israel, which means it's not an Arab-Israeli conflict anymore. What's complicating the conflict today is that it is seen as a Muslim-Jewish conflict. This is the most dangerous layer that we need to work on. I know people in Pakistan and Southeast Asian countries who had no relationship with Israel, who had no wars of any kind with Israel, and they hate Israel, and they want to fight against Israel, and they dream about eliminating Israel from existence, simply because they believe that it is this type of conflict. Okay, this part we saw, but I will just read this part. I mean, we explained already when we explained the plan of the Muslim Brotherhood, but I want just to read this from Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhoods, that will give you an idea about how radical Islamists think, not only the Muslim Brotherhood. Hassan al-Banna said that it is the nature of Islam to dominate, not to be dominated, to impose its law, the Sharia law, on all nations and to extend its power to the entire planet. So this is exactly what Islamists think. This is exactly why Islamists want to destroy the American civilization. They want to destroy the Western civilization so they can build their own Sharia system of governance and rule everyone else. This is about the duty of jihad. Also, it's like a differentiation between how Islamists look at jihad and how, ordinary Muslims look at the word jihad. Jihad, in its essence, is taking the means for the Muslim to take the effort to lead a virtuous life. It's not violent at all. It should not be violent. But in political Islamism, they look at jihad as a violent offensive that is an obligation on all capable Muslims, capable adult Muslims, to spread the word of Islam and get to the point of governance by Sharia law. It's about the collective and the individual, as we were just explaining. Moderate Muslims would look at jihad as a struggle for the individual good, while radical Islamists see it as a violent offensive for what they think is the collective good of the Muslim Ummah. Okay, this part is a little controversial, and I feel a bit difficult every time I get to that, because we were not trained somehow to criticize our religion. I'm a devout Muslim myself, but I don't see anything wrong with criticizing my religion when saying that there are certain things that are problematic in Islam that made it somehow vulnerable for these radical Islamist groups to abuse it. And one of the reasons why Islam is somehow vulnerable to be abused by these political Islamists and radical jihadists has to do with the fact that Islam started as a political religion itself. Prophet Muhammad was not a spiritual leader. Prophet Muhammad he was a military leader, a person who wanted to rule, who had expansionist goals. He wanted to spread Islam beyond the geography of Mecca and Medina, and he created an army for that. And if you look at the holy texts in Islam, you will see that many of them, especially in the early days of Islam, are mainly about this, about calling upon all adult Muslims, capable Muslims, to join the ranks of the Muslim troops who are going to fight against what they call the disbelievers, including, unfortunately, people who are even from the Abrahamic religions, like the Jewish people or the Christian people, in order to spread the word of Islam. And from there came maybe all the conquerors you have seen that happened in North Africa, for example. Egypt, for ages before Islam appeared, was a Christian country, was a majority Coptic Christian country. And when Islam came, actually the Coptic population in Egypt suffered a big time. And they were forced to pay taxes in order not to convert their religions. Many of them had to convert their religion. So I think that's what we need to, I don't know, reform or go back and like find a way to refine these holy texts that encourages radical Islamists today to use against Islam, and somehow maybe we correct the mistakes that happened at that time and take Islam more to the spiritual side rather than to the political side, and thus disempower radical Islamists this way. The last point I will conclude with about the war on the West, going back to the United States here. This photo, as you can, I'm not sure if you can see it well, is from a bookstore in Washington, D.C. And I have other photos from bookstores in everywhere I go here, from Boston, from New York. We don't need to show, but this tells you, this summarizes. Actually, I encourage you to go to bookstores anywhere nearby here, and you will see the same problem. This is the Middle East section there. You get in there, all the books are about Gaza, about demonizing Israel, about saying how bad the Israelis are and how great the Hamas is and Hezbollah is and how great all these resistance groups that want to get rid of this white colonialist, imperialist Israel from the region. And this is not a bookstore in the Middle East. This is a bookstore in the United States. And my fear here is that we are not only living a moment of radical Islamists threatening the West, we actually beyond that now. We are living the moment of the Palestinization of the Western politics. And I am so scared to see this as someone who saw that the Palestinization of the Middle East has destroyed my Middle East. And I don't want it to destroy America. It's so shocking that we are at a time now when the presidential debate in the United States is part of it, a big part of it, a big chunk of it is about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It didn't make any sense to me. It's so shocking that the UN General Assembly meetings that were happening last week were all about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Actually, no one president appeared who did not mention the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. No one speaker at the General Assembly who did not mention the conflict. And actually, all of their statements are so biased against Israel. So we are now living a terrible, terrible moment called the Palestinization of the West. So I hope we can open our eyes and see what's happening. I hope you can speak to your politicians, get over this. If they want really to help the Middle East, they have to stand by Israel. Israel is doing a great favor for everyone in the Middle East right now, helping us get rid of the terrorist organizations that has been wreaking havoc for years, killing not only Israelis, but also Muslims, Arabs, and Christians, and everyone. I mean, they have been really destroying the Middle East. Israel is now making the Iranian mullahs shaking and hiding. So if the West really wants to protect itself, I think it has to side with Israel. And once again, if Arab countries also are thinking straight, they should be siding with Israel. The first step to rescue the West from this scenario, from going down this road, is definitely supporting Israel in its ongoing war. So, thank you.
That was great.
Thank
It's a little
you.
scary. And so, a couple questions, similar, related, are that concentrating on all of this happening in the United States, like what you're presenting. Two parts. Where's the voice of other like-minded Muslims in countering the Islamist dialogue? And also, when part of the mission, or my intent with this weekend, was to educate and empower all of us to have meaningful conversations with people we meet in our life. And some of those people that we meet in our life might have different opinions. And so are there tools that you can give us to, one, identify who we're talking to? Are we talking to a moderate Muslim, or are we talking to a radical Islamist? And when we talk to them, how do we know who we're talking to? And how can we have a conversation in the hopes of, I guess, trying to present your side?
So first of all, I mean, moderate Muslims do exist. They are many, they are everywhere, but the problem is that they are not organized. So I think a good point to start with is I know many of them. Actually, you know, on my way out of Egypt, I was receiving death threats, of course, I mean, from radical Islamists. But at the same time, I was receiving messages of encouragement, even until today, from Arab people, from young people in the Arab world, young Muslims, young Christians in the Arab world, who are telling me that you're doing the right thing, but we're just so scared to do the same. We are so scared to speak up because we don't want to face the same fate that you faced. So I think the first step is to empower this silent majority, is to encourage them, in the Middle East I mean, is to encourage them to speak up. And I think we have a very powerful tool that is social media that can really help them do that, as maybe Heavy will explain later today. Another important thing which I suggest is to make an organization that can compete against the Muslim Brotherhood organizations here in the United States, like CARE and ISNA and all the others, and provide an alternative narrative to the Muslims here. The third important thing, it's a governmental task, which is to monitor what's happening inside mosques. I am a Muslim, and in Ramadan last year, it was my first Ramadan here without my family. So I thought, okay, let me go to the mosque and spend, Ramadan with other Muslims. I entered the mosque in Washington. It's a big mosque there. I won't mention the name. I entered for 5 minutes, and I couldn't stay longer. When I walked in, all the walls were covered by footage from Gaza of people under rubble, people dead under rubble, and bloody photos from the Gaza scene, and all these slogans, very anti-Semitic slogans. I feared for my life. I thought someone would recognize my face and know that, oh, I am the Dalia, who supported Israel, and they will come after me. I couldn't stay. And of course, all over the walls, there were posters from logos of all these radical organizations that I've been fighting for many years. So I had to run from a mosque inside the United States. This is very dangerous. These mosques has to be monitored. What is being said there has to be monitored, and also the education given to young people there has to be monitored.
But to your point, when you first started, the idea that in the United States we're going to monitor a religious building and a religion sort of goes against free speech and everything, right? So
politicized. Yeah, it was politicized to serve the purpose of these groups. It was politicized like everything else. Actually, even the rhetoric about the BDS campaigns inside American universities, it's simply a politicization of or politicizing a very noble cause that seems to be noble, like standing up for the humanitarian situation in Gaza or so, by BDS campaign, which is targeting Israel. So it's a manipulation. It's a big manipulation game that these organizations are playing. And once again, after 9/11, they were empowered somehow by the American administration, and I think whoever comes next in the administration should correct this mistake. And if it gives us any hope, actually, I'm not sure if you read the statement that came from Vice President Harris in reaction to the killing of Nasrallah. Actually, the statement, the opening sentences, the statement is saying that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. This is very powerful. This is a very strong message that the American people need to hear at a time when the press here in the United States describe Hassan Nasrallah as a shrewd, charismatic religious leader, you know? So I think this is what we need to do, more education about radical Islamism, about Islamism in general, and how to deal with it, and about the fact that it is a threat on the West more even than it is a threat on us in the Middle East.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Dalia, thank you so much. As we are moving to the next session, which is actually a double session or a session divided to two parts. Yesterday and partly today, we talked about the aspect of social media and the issue of the challenge of social media in the discussion, both in the context of the Middle East discussion, as well as in the context of generally addressing the difficulty to decode a complex world when we live in time where social media and media platforms are dominating. So actually in the next two sessions, we are going to try to address those issues in a wider perspective, in a deeper perspective. And the first of the two sessions will be presented by Hyvie, which will refer to the very interesting, intriguing discussion in Arab media and the discussion in the context of all the issues that we've talked today. Hyvie, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Avi. I will grab this. This is for me. Thank you all for being here today. As you know, I don't know if all of you were here yesterday, but I was definitely talking about the power of media and the importance of utilizing media and social media, and also be educated about what's really happening on social media, because that's such a new and powerful tool that is double-edged, that provides a lot of opportunities but also dangers. And you know, talking about that power of media, but in Arab countries it's been propaganda. So I grew up in Damascus, Syria, hearing and seeing all around just propaganda that is hateful in general towards the West as a general, but specifically towards the Jewish people in Israel. The Jewish people in Israel always have been demonized, and this is something that contrasted with my own home and how my family was, which is a unique case. Liberal family, and my mom was born and raised in the Jewish quarter in Aleppo, even though two Muslim families, both her parents, but also my parents were mixed. And I had a different perspective and realized the importance of media. So I became a journalist, and I want to tell you a little bit more about what basically I've been working on, but also what's happening, because there's a shift that's happening in the narrative that dominated Arabic language media. And we'll start basically the shift towards Israel, because like I said, there was always this drumming of war and hate towards Israel systematically for decades. As you see here, words like the Zionist enemy, the Zionist entity is always used. The word Zionism in the Arabic vocabulary is used as a curse word, which is something that absolutely needs to be addressed. And I actually spoke about it in the Arabic language on social media. But it's something that was basically very prevalent throughout Arabic language traditional media. Now, there is the Iranian regime's influence and occupation. And I want to talk about a point that Avi mentioned, which is what happened in the Arab Spring. So after the United States went to Iraq, Iran basically became a dominant power in Iraq, slowly but surely. And there was a point later on where people start protesting in Arab countries, asking for freedom and democracy. Now, of course, you know, we've had the Islamist problem that was lingering under the surface that is also empowered by dictatorial regimes. And what happened in a number of Arab countries is that this lingering existence of Iranian forces that was actually very powerful in Iraq at that point and became even more powerful in countries like Lebanon, where Hezbollah was there, but it actually became more powerful because it started intervening in countries, neighboring countries like Syria, to suppress the uprising that was happening against the Assad regime, which is a part of the resistance, right? That's the axis of resistance, the Assad regime, the Iranian regime, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad. And then there was also protests in Yemen. And that's when the Houthis took over. So the Iranian regime all of a sudden became the winner, that and the Islamists, because there was the rise of ISIS and other Islamists and elements that were, terrorists, basically. And they became the most powerful in the region. And what happened at that point is that a lot of the younger generations started realizing, we liked Hezbollah in 2006. When Israel actually fought Hezbollah in 2006, after Hezbollah broke into the borders with Israel, killed 5 IDF soldiers, kidnapped 2 soldiers. People in Arab countries were glorifying Hezbollah, saying that this is basically a heroic thing to do. And people who would argue and say that this was basically them attacking and killing Israeli soldiers inside of Israel. They started that war. Nobody would agree with that. They will call the person a traitor and all of that. So what happened is that people at that point started recognizing that Hezbollah is actually slaughtering people in Syria, in different towns in Syria, that the Iranian regime is killing people in Iraq, that the Houthis are the ones now controlling Yemen, and they are killing and murdering people in Yemen. So that actually became a point when you would see rising voices on social media, which was still in the beginning, but it was like Facebook mainly, and later on, Instagram and then Twitter. But people started saying that Israel could be an ally, that Israel is actually a country that models a lot of qualities that people in Arab countries would like to have, including the rights and the financial aspirations that they have, that they could have that, like people in Israel. So they started learning more about Israel, and they started seeing that the Iranian-backed militias are actually the common enemy that Israel and these people in Arab countries have. So that was the beginning. That was a shift that started to happen. And of course, after that, there was a watershed moment, which was the Abraham Accords. Because at that point, there was a lot of more people are talking on social media, expressing themselves. But then the Abraham Accords basically for the first time mentioned, okay, well, we are, the countries, the UAE, of course with Israel, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, but not really because Sudan has its own instability. But basically that they said, we want the people to have also collaboration and connection and all of these things that did not exist in the previous peace agreements between Israel and Jordan and Egypt. So that was a turning point, and that's when a lot of people started coming out and actually not be afraid anymore and speak about wanting peace and promoting peace and showcasing themselves with their Israeli friends, and how there was Israelis visiting the UAE and how people from Bahrain visiting Israel, and that was something that just never happened before, and people were not afraid of saying that this is what they want, because originally people who would say that they want peace with Israel, and if they are in any of these countries that I mentioned, including Gulf countries, they will actually be in physical danger. But after the Abraham Accords, people were not afraid in these countries. And people who are outside, or they can actually speak freely on social media, they started voicing their opinions even more so. So there was many voices that were coming out and talking, and Yalla was basically the good news channel that I co-founded to do just that, because even though the Abraham Accords happened, Arab language media, the traditional media, didn't really catch up. They were not basically Al Jazeera anymore. The narrative was not as, in that kind of extreme. And of course, there's always a variation. It was never like Al Jazeera, but they were not that far removed from how Al Jazeera is. But then they were actually not promoting the people-to-people piece. So you didn't see that massive step that you would hope to see in Arabic language media, knowing the power of media and the importance of media. But there were more people speaking on social media. And we basically started creating content where we were showing, for the first time, something about Israel's culture, about the Jewish people, interviewing ambassadors who are talking, about themselves, like as a father, as a husband, and having conversations that were just never had before. And there were many educational initiatives, even a group that I joined that were basically touring and talking to other people about how that we all want coexistence in the Middle East. And it was a really, I think, historical time, and it is still like that moment is so historic that it's just kind of you are witnessing a new era start in the region. And social media, I think social media, like I said earlier, it's a double-edged sword because people who are on social media are more likely to be open to peace with Israel than people who are not. So there's a study by the Wilson Center that said people who are in Arab countries who are on 5 social media platforms are 4.6% more likely to want peace with Israel, which is not a big number, but it's actually a start because they're actually willing to say that. There's a lot of fear in these countries about people to express that they want to do so. And the people who are not on social media were actually less open to having peace with Israel. So here, I want to show you a number of interviews that we did at Yalla, and to me this is so historical because I've never, and this is all of course translated to Arabic, so there are things in Arabic that are translated to English. We do everything in both languages, but I just want you to have a glimpse of what happened, which is really historical. So this is me interviewing the first Israeli ambassador to the UAE, and Arabs are watching. So, is hummus better in Israel or in the UAE?
Listen.
Because of course everybody's competing about
this very carefully. It's a very delicate question. We are eating hummus with tahini. So the hummus in Israel is better and the tahini here is better, so we are mixing.
Oh, what a great answer.
We will need to mix.
الهدف من وراء الانضمام إلى الاتفاقيات الإبراهيمية هو فتح العديد من المجالات أمام التعاون بين البلدين. فالتعاون الاقتصادي هو جزء من التعاون اللي نتطلع له في البحرين.
Since the founding of Israel, the group of countries saying we want to wipe this country off the face of the earth, that's not a good place to be. It reduces security for each of those nations. It creates economic hardship for those countries. Israel's a prosperous, technologically advanced, very capable security partner.
ممكن المهمة هاي في بداياتها الحين الاتفاقية هي عبارة عن اتفاقية شراكة بين دولة الإمارات وإسرائيل في هذا المجال، أن في المستقبل يكون هناك في مشاركات مختلفة في مجال استكشاف الفضاء.
When I grew up, every day in my school in Jerusalem we were singing a song called Shir LaShalom, a song for the peace. And every morning, and we are raising our kids like that we want peace. We need peace in order to live. We cannot live in a war zone. It's not. Nobody can stay and live in a war zone. It's hard for everyone, and the price is very high.
تسامح ديال بين الأديان للتعايش، التسامح اللي كاينة، وإحنا دايما عايشين مع مثلا أنا في مدينة تطوان كانوا اليهود، كانوا الإسبان عايشين معنا وجيراننا وعايشين مع بعضياتنا بواحد الطريقة زوينة ومعتبرين مغاربة
So let me tell you, for somebody who grew up hearing Arabic language media, this is extraordinary. This was never happened before. I can just tell you, the idea of humanization and seeing Israelis and the Jewish people as people is it's such a simple, natural thing, but it's yet so impossible with that type of ideology and that type of indoctrination. So for the first time, and for me to be part of this was just very humbling and very honoring, but also the response that we got from people was also very heartwarming because people were like, oh yeah, you know, we love Lior Raz, for example. We didn't, you know, and then they actually watched Fauda afterwards, the people who didn't know about Fauda. And just seeing Israelis and talk to them, like how, you know, people were basically saying about the similarities, which are there and just nobody talks about. So that was a watershed moment on every level. It was just a very promising time. And I want to show you another short clip that is from the interview that I did with the Israeli ambassador to the US, Michael Herzog, and that was only a couple of months before October 7th. And I'll tell you why this is such an important clip.
How Israel's Arab neighbors and generally everyone outside of Israel should think about Zionism. How would you describe it to them?
I'm very glad you asked this question. And yes, you're right. There's a lot of misunderstanding, misrepresentation of this notion. Essentially, Zionism is a national movement of the Jewish people. The Jewish people have the right, like any other people, to self-determination in their own ancestral homeland. We've been tied to this land for thousands of years, and the Jewish people have that right like any other nation.
So, you know, I did mention in the beginning about Zionism, right? It's the word Zionism, people don't even know what it means in Arabic language, and it's used as a negative thing. So when I asked the Israeli ambassador to talk about Zionism, this is so important because it's literally dismantling that narrative that was based just on literally, you know, building ignorance and disinformation to people, rather than telling them and explaining to them what's actually happening. What does this word mean? And a lot of people were like, oh, we didn't know that this is what Zionism means. They literally did not know. That's something I think Hussein mentioned earlier about how they would literally lie about the Israeli anthem, Hatikva. They would like literally put different words in it to make it seem like there's this animosity from the people of Israel, from the Jewish people towards the Arabs, and that is just not the case. So it's just about unveiling and telling that truth that nobody was telling. And, you know, Lior Raz, you saw him, he said, I grew up praying for peace. And this, I don't think in Arab countries that was ever told to them, because they're told the exact opposite. Now, of course, you know, after this very positive, hopeful time, we've had October 7th happen, which is a tragedy on every level. Of course, for the Jewish people and the suffering of the Jewish people throughout history. And, you know, for that to happen again, but also for people who are hopeful for peace and are building peace with each other, and then seeing the setback that happened right after October 7th in terms of the people who are speaking out and saying that they want peace, but then there's the fear, and then there is the narrative, unfortunately, in the traditional Arabic language media that returned to how it was before. I know it was a momentum because hope does come back, but it is important to stop at this moment because things did shift. I think there's, important to say that a lot of activists stopped talking, and they were afraid. I think there was also a coverage variation because I don't want to make it like all Arab language media outlets, for example, were saying the exact same thing. There is still a difference between what Al Jazeera would say and what Sky News Arabia would say. Sky News Arabia is owned by the UAE. Yes, I do want to see more and better coverage from specifically the Abraham Accord countries and moderate Arab countries. But there is still a difference there, and I want to show you how that looks like. So this is Al Jazeera headline. So Al Jazeera basically, and I'm not sure how clear this is to you, but this post on Al Jazeera on X is glorifying Abu Ubaidah. Abu Ubaidah is the covered head guy, al-mulatham in Arabic, who is the spokesperson for Hamas, who was glorifying the murder of innocent Israelis. And they're basically saying that he became a symbol. And they even called October 7th Tawafan al-Aqsa, which means the flooding of Al-Aqsa. So their whole claim, which is what Avi was talking about earlier, Al-Aqsa, they want to go and take Jerusalem, even though Jerusalem is historically the capital of the Jewish people, and that's even in actually the holy book for Muslims, which is the Quran. But that is the Al Jazeera, just kind of as like an example of how they would be glorifying Hamas and glorifying somebody like Abu Ubaidah, which is the spokesperson for Hamas. Now, this is Sky News Arabia. So Sky News Arabia still used the hashtag Tawafan al-Aqsa, but they did call it the October 7th attack. And here they're saying how Hamas has been planning October 7th for a very long time. So it's not perfect, but it is a channel that is not trying to incite the terrorism. It's a channel that is, saying things in a way that is, more about what basically happened, interviewing Israelis to talk about October 7th. But there was still one thing missing very, very much, and that is the human aspect. After October 7th, what I was really hoping for, as somebody who is for peace and for humanity, is to hear the stories of the people in Israel who went through October 7th, the families of the victims, the families of the hostages, and that was nowhere to be found in Arab media. And, I want to talk about also the other dimension of why this is going on in this part of the world. The Iranian regime basically has its influence in all the countries where it has militias, like Lebanon. So the media narrative in a country like Lebanon is literally controlled by Hezbollah's narrative, which is the Iranian regime's narrative, which is the axis of resistance narrative. Even channels like MTV, which is owned by the Kuwait Lebanese, which is the one that is not pro-Hezbollah at all. It's a Christian faction in Lebanon that is more liberal and wants to be part of the world. But still, there's intimidation, so they can't really say what they want to say, even in MTV. And then you have other countries, like, of course, Syria is completely controlled by that narrative. You have Iraq, of course, Yemen. So even in countries like Gulf countries, because this axis had so much dominance and power for so long, the employees who work in all these different channels, and even the moderate Arab countries, a lot of them are ideologically agreeing and with Hamas, right? They are, and they work in these channels. So there is that layers, and that's when Maya told me about the word layers, about that type of influence that they have over Arabic language media. So in terms of, there's this study by the Associated Press, by the way. It talks about how the Iranian regime creates even social media accounts, and this is in English and in Arabic. So the Iranian regime also uses other strategies to infiltrate social media, creating false news sites and impersonating fake accounts to spread a certain narrative. And we've had that happen to me personally, when I write on social media. And all of the other activists, you see those kind of, it's called the social media army of the Iranian regime, and all of those elements that are part of the axis of resistance that they troll the person who is saying a different opinion to make an impression, first of all, to scare them, and to make an impression like a lot of people are against that narrative, to scare the person off. So this is something that they have been doing, and of course, you know, they have been trying to infiltrate even people's websites, emails in the United States and in the Middle East and all over. Now, this is a statement that only came out a few months ago by our own Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, but basically she's saying that the Iranian regime, even in terms of the protests that we've had in the United States in our own college campuses, they were not only organized but funded by the Iranian regime. That's the level of infiltration that this regime was able to do so far. And this is not only that they're trying to, you know, prevent peace from happening, for radicalization and, you know, promoting, inciting violence and terrorism against Israel, against the Jewish people, but they want to do it here too. It's all, they view Israel as an extension of the West, of the democratic West, and to them, if they can destroy us here, that would be their grand prize, because the United States is the big Satan according to them, right? So they've already been able to fund the protests that we've had in our own college campuses, which is mind-blowing that even our own American media is not covering this enough, just to tell our own young generations what is happening. Now, this is really important to point out, because throughout the coverage of the war between Israel and Hamas post-October 7th was also completely misled by the misuse of even American media and international media with the sources. Because if you know, as a journalist, if I want to tell you something, I'm going to try to go and get the most credible source possible about what actually happened. And how did I know this is happening? And all of these really, like, there's fact-check teams in TV stations and news outlets in the West. This is part of running a media outlet, you know? But then they have been relying on Hamas. So what has been happening is that Western media and international media, and of course Arabic language media, have been relying on the Interior Ministry of Gaza, right? Now people say, oh, Interior Ministry of Gaza, it sounds like an official place, but that's actually Hamas. So this is one very clear example of this misstep, but it's bigger than a misstep in my opinion. I mean, this is a major, major mistake. In Al Ahli Hospital, there was a moment that happened a few months ago, I don't know if you remember, where all the international media reported that Israel bombed a hospital, Al Ahli Hospital in Gaza, killing 471 people. Now, wow, okay, that's horrible. Then Israel came out and said, but we didn't. We actually did not. This looks like it was either Hamas or the Islamic Jihad misfiring or intentionally firing so they can say that Israel did this. The news continued to be blasted everywhere. And their source is according to the Ministry of Interior Ministry of Gaza, which is Hamas. Now, what happened later is that the intelligence of the United States and Europe came out later and said, actually based on these images and after actually investigating how the scene looks like, not only that this is not consistent with an Israeli airstrike, this is actually consistent with the type of weapons that either the Islamic Jihad or Hamas has, and also the people who actually were killed on that day by the Islamic Jihad or Hamas were dozens of people and not 471 people, which is what the media was saying. for a few days. And even though they came out later and they apologized and they said, oh yeah, actually that was, not accurate and this is the accurate, but the damage is done. And that's not okay. Because you as a news outlet, you have to have the fact-check team. And when you take sources from a terrorist organization like Hamas, you have to say, this is according to Hamas, and we have to be verifying our own sources to know what's actually happening before you report it as an actual fact. So this is a problem that is happening, unfortunately, not only in the Middle East, in Arab countries, but in the United States and all over the world, which definitely needs to be addressed. The same thing was happening on social media. So this is an example, and of course there are a lot of different reports about what's happening on social media. There are so many concerning allegations about what's happening on TikTok, for example. Many pro-peace activists and activists who are trying to speak the truth about what happened on October 7th were basically silenced on TikTok. And the ones who are promoting Hamas's agenda were going viral. And an official at TikTok resigned and talked about this, an Israeli official, and you can look it up. This is it's an ongoing situation, and there's a lack of clarity on the algorithms of social media platforms and why this is happening, and I think there are a lot of questions to be answered, and I think that Andrew will probably be helping us later with that to understand more. But this is on Instagram. So there was a very viral story, Eyes on Rafah. I don't know if you guys have seen this, All Eyes on Rafah. At that same time, another viral story as a response to All Eyes on Rafah was, where were your eyes on October 7th? And what happened is that started picking up and going viral, and then Instagram deleted it. Then after they deleted it, they actually reinstated it. But again, the momentum was gone. And they apologized, but that's not, there's no explanation why. And why is that okay, right? So there is a war of misinformation that is happening, and there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. But the answer, in my opinion, in terms of people who want to tell the truth, is not to give up and not to be like, okay, this is really hard. A lot of things are, no, it's the opposite. It's stepping up and telling the story. Storytelling is one of the most powerful ways to educate people. Because once you present a story of another human being, it's hard for somebody to filter and try to dehumanize somebody when they see them, So after October 7th, we basically, we are the good news, right? Yalla, the good news. And all of a sudden, we're faced with the reality that no, there are no good news right now. So we need to actually do our part and educate people in the Arabic-speaking world, and increasingly, actually, more important, in English as well, which is why it's really good that we're both in Arabic and in English. So we pivoted to telling people stories and amplify voices of the people who were basically the victims of October 7th that no other Arabic language outlet or media was showing at all. And of course, telling the stories, we're not trying to present any specific side. It's just about humanity, and that's what we kind of started. And look, the silent majority, because that's something that Dalia was saying right now. Our understanding and my own belief is that there is a silent majority in Arab countries that is not on Hamas's side, that is actually wants and knows that this is wrong, this is bad, but they are afraid of speaking out, but they're also not being led. They are ready to be more expressive about their beliefs if there is a direction that is taking them in that way. And that's what we're basically trying to create, a path for others to walk on. So here, I'm not putting the volume, but we started interviewing people who are not featured in the Arabic language media. And this is Musab Hassan Yusuf. I don't know if you know him, but he is the son of one of Hamas's founders. He's very outspoken in English, and people know him a lot in the West. but people do not see him in the Arabic language media. And he has a lot to say because he knows Hamas. He actually lived with his own father, who was one of Hamas's founders. So he had a lot to say. These are activists. I had female activists. And that's in the time where people are scared to talk. So we started having, so this is a Moroccan activist, this is Syrian Lebanese, this is a Lebanese scholar, Lebanese American scholar here, but he was talking about Hamas and what basically groups like Hamas do, and the issues that are not really discussed in Arabic, but also not discussed enough in English now. This is Naz Daily, so he's Israeli Arab, who's very well known on social media, and he was also speaking about what's happening. It was just for us like a time to tell people stories, but that was not, I don't know if you guys know Montana Tucker, but also nobody will know about what she's doing in the Arabic language speaking world, even though she's very, very popular, and she's a great dancer and singer, so people like her, but they'd never heard her, speak in an interview. This is a Palestinian activist who was speaking out against Hamas as well, and he lived in Gaza, and he actually got out of Gaza just a month before October 7th. So this is another one.
عندما نرى امرأة يتم اغتصابها أمام الكاميرات وهؤلاء لا يخجلون من أفعالهم صوروها وهو بشكل مباشر هم يفعلون ذلك وهم على دراية بأفعالهم وردة الفعل كذلك أمر محزن جدا أن الإنسانية ما يزال بين الإنسانية يعيش هؤلاء.
And of course I interviewed Hussein, I interviewed Dalia, so even our friends here have been interviewed. This is a Palestinian activist, so I want to tell you, people were literally not talking during that time on social media. So this is a Palestinian activist who lived in Gaza, and she was talking about her experiences living under Hamas, and oh my God, people were reacting so much to this interview because it was shocking. You would never hear a Palestinian talking about the abuse of Hamas in the
صار
Arabic
عندي
language.
شك بالوطنية وصار عندي شك بفلسطين وصار عندي شك بالجميع انه انا حدا بدي اعرف. لما صرت اقابل عائلات اكثر صاروا يطلعوا على الحيط يقولوا لي منار هذا ابني. هذا اللي انقتل ابني واللي قتله مش اسرائيل حماس عرفتي؟
So she was just saying that people would tell her, this is my son, and he was killed. And who killed him wasn't Israel. Who killed him was Hamas. And that's a Palestinian saying about another Palestinian lady. That is the type of stories that nobody is sharing in the Arabic language. And it was shocking to people to see that, because it's, even though some people probably know in the back of their head Hamas is a terrorist organization, but they just do not want to confront that reality. Here, it's because we also wanted to highlight the stories of hostage families, which is really, really important. This is from the Bibas.
He really is an amazing boy, and a 4-year-old can tell they're bright, they're aware of what's happening. He probably misses his father so much, thinking about him being separated for so long. And Kfir, what can you say about such a young baby? We didn't get the chance to enjoy him yet, He was a calm, smiling baby, and watching him and my boy, my baby, his name is Guy, thinking about how they will grow up together.
They need to be home, back with their loved one, and I really want to get back to my life with my parents, and in someday I want my father will be in my wedding, to meet my kids, and I'm really scared that it's not going to happen.
So, seeing stories of people, I think, is just so powerful. And I want to talk about the shift, because there was a shift that is happening, and I think Avi highlighted this, because that's really, really important. Right now, we're actually seeing a shift in the opposite direction. More people are actually speaking out again. And it's really interesting to see the trend that is actually happening in the exact opposite direction than things are happening here. So we are seeing here the protests that were allegedly, actually, apparently supported by the Iranian regime. But in Arab countries, we're seeing a rise of voices that are against Hamas, against Hezbollah, and against the Iranian regime, and in favor and support of peace with Israel. And Avi did mention how there were a lot of people who started basically saying, look what Hamas did from their perspective about them going out there, committing an atrocity, an attempt of genocide, and then they're leaving the Palestinians as human shields outside while they're hiding in the tunnels. So people were starting to get angry. But this became even more prevalent today. Like now we're seeing an extreme shift, and I couldn't be like the timing of the conference and what's happening right now is just very important, just because the shift is actually growing very rapidly in terms of public opinion. And so these are basically what's happening, and I want to contrast about what's the response for Israel's targeted operations against Hezbollah commanders. Where before people would support Hezbollah and you would not even dare to speak about Hassan Nasrallah. People would go crazy if somebody criticized Hassan Nasrallah. Now what we're seeing is the exact opposite. And it's amazing to see. So these are social media posts that I actually just got like throughout the last few days, and this is from yesterday, the one in the middle. And you can see here, so they are basically appraising Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, for what he's doing. I want to warn you that the translation on X is not perfect. So it's an Arabic language post that I just pressed translate, to translate it automatically, and it's not perfect. So like here it says that Israel did everything to save basically its country and like its citizens, but the translation was not like actually 100% factual, just so you know. But generally the sense here is that this person, his name is Sufyan Samarai, he's an Iraqi, and he is appraising Prime Minister Netanyahu. Here too, this guy is talking about how Hezbollah and Hamas are horrible and murdering their people, while Israel is actually doing the exact opposite towards its people. But this was really interesting from yesterday because those people are inside of Syria holding a sign in Hebrew. In Hebrew, they wrote it in Hebrew, thanking Prime Minister Netanyahu for Nasrallah's demise. So to me, that is historical. Like, you would not see this happening before. So this is the shift that is happening, and I know that a lot of people here are unaware of, because if you would show this to the people protesting or college students, I think they will be speechless, because these are people from the region. They know what is happening. They know what they're going through and what is going on a lot more than they do, right? Now, here are videos that just happened, and I wanted to end today with it, because, this just shows that there's a new Middle East that is being created. And I know it is hard sometimes to, see it, because there's just a lot of negative that we're seeing, especially on social media. And I know Andrew is going to talk about what's actually happening in terms of what's going on social media and how to be vigilant because of those interferences and infiltrations that are actually meaning to hurt us and to divide us here and to turn us against our enemies, while the reality is that people in the Arab countries are actually becoming more and more awake. So things are changing, and yes, you can go ahead. So this is in Syria, people protesting, not protesting, celebrating. So this is people celebrating Hezbollah as head being killed by Israel. This is Christian area in Lebanon. That's the response. And this is what our headlines are saying, that he was a charismatic, courageous leader. But look, this is the reality of what people think of it. This is Israel. So they're saying Yallah, which is great. So I want to thank you so much for listening today. This is really, really timely.
Thank you, Havi. Havi, real quick before Andrew gets up there, can you just tell us what Yallah means?
So Yallah means let's go in both Arabic and Hebrew. Let's go. So that's why when they're singing it in Hebrew, I was like, okay.
So, I guess questions. Having a little technical difficulty here. This is a question, how does the world get accurate statistics of what's happening in Gaza as far as injuries, fatalities, supply shortages in food and medicine if they don't depend on Hamas?
Oh my God, what an important question. But it's also, the answer to that question is very complicated. Why? Because Hamas did not only dominate Gaza and its people in the way we saw, and how even media, like channels, will basically their presence there, it's completely infiltrated by Hamas, but also international organizations. So even the United Nations organizations and agencies that are in Gaza are completely infiltrated by Hamas members who operate these organizations, including the Red Cross. So that makes it so difficult because literally, I mean, they are a terrorist organization ruling a specific area, and they are making sure that nobody could say anything they do not want them to say. Nobody could do anything that they don't want them to do. And they will murder the person who would do anything, right, that disagrees with what they want. And, even the day before yesterday, they murdered a girl who was heading a hunger and humanitarian aid organization, who was Palestinian. She was the head of that organization. They murdered her only 2 days ago because she was refusing to give them the aid. So that's what makes it very challenging for outside, basically countries or organizations or even news outlets to get accurate information about what's actually happening. That said, that should not be a reason to actually give them even more leverage by citing their own numbers, which are completely false. And yeah, it's a very complicated issue because of that, basically organizations are unable to access Gaza and operate freely to get those accurate numbers.
And in the United States, whether it's recognized media, CNN, Times, Journal, or social media outlets, if we see that there's an inaccurate statement or something, what can we do as just the regular public to call them out?
Use social media. I know it's like social media is a double-edged sword. So flagging it, making a post out of it, and tagging the publication. Of course, you can call them, email them. This type of pressure works.
Okay, can you repeat that?
Posting whatever they are posting inaccurately, share that post, say the accurate information, tell them that this is not journalism, this should not happen, and tag them. So they are being flagged basically publicly. So, and more people will start following, right? Once you post something, people are like, oh, that happened, so they will start sharing what you shared. Utilize social media. There is a power in social media, and I think that's really important. And also email them and call them. Contact those news outlets and share your concern, because in the end of the day, they are institutions, and they have to have some sort of accountability. And when they see multiple people addressing the same issue, they will start retreating, and then others will follow. You know, I think definitely speaking out is very important.
Why is Western media not showing videos and commentary like you just showed?
Traditional media or social media?
First, traditional media.
I know. I mean, in Arab countries, it's because even the governments who signed the Abraham Accords, I don't think that they have made the decision yet, because in these countries, the media is owned by the governments, right? In Arab countries. Even though their coverage is better than Al Jazeera, right? I'm not gonna, but, Oh,
Yeah,
in the US?
The question was actually, why aren't the Western media, like if we turn on CNN, why aren't we seeing that?
So that's a really good question. There's a setback in our Western media. You guys were talking about the New York Times yesterday. They agree with Al Jazeera on a lot of their points nowadays, right? So what's happening is that there is a disconnect between the West and what's happening in the Middle East, and between even the West and its own values. You know, I think people are less and less open to hearing a perspective that they are not listening to all around, right? They're like, wanna shut it up. They label it as you being on one side or the other side. There's polarization, there's division, unfortunately, and that's impacting our own media, which is it should be a free media. It should not be following an ideology, right? So this is a setback that we're experiencing in the West. But I do still think that that does not represent our own American public. Like, I know that their voices are louder, and yes, we are seeing louder voices in college campuses, on traditional media, and even on social media at times. But that does not represent the vast majority of the American people, because as you kind of start understanding that narrative, you realize that they're against the values that this country was founded on. And that's why I think we should not give up, and we actually need to continue speaking out. And I actually believe that what's happening in the Middle East is going to come back here and impact what's happening here. When you see somebody like Dalia and somebody like Hussein, and you hear their story, and even if you're somebody who is, you know, an expert, right? You can't really argue much when you have somebody from the region telling you about these things that, like, an Arab American who was born here is trying to claim, right? So I think this is, you know, we're in an ever-shrinking world. Did somebody say something?
And finally, are there, can you name one or two media sources, news sources that we can trust, that you feel, all of you together, that feel give the most accurate, least biased?
Yes. So I did, and thanks to Maya and Avi, so as part of the booklet, and soon will be a part of the, actually the platform that they have on the website, I have a list, not yet, but will happen very, very soon. I actually included a list of pages, personalities, news outlets for you guys to follow and to see what they're posting. And the thing is, even if the person is posting in Arabic, for example, you can translate on all social media platforms. You know it's not gonna be perfect. Sometimes you have to maybe, just to confirm, put it like copy paste it, but a lot of them do post in English. So I did include all of the resources for that, because it is important to identify and follow the people who are gonna tell you factual information, not biased, and they're actually heading in the right direction for humanity, for peace, for tolerance, for coexistence, not for extremism and terrorism.
Thank you very much.
She actually has a question,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Where and how did you get the
Thank you. That's a lot of people ask me that question. So I don't feel like I am at risk. Actually, some of the people I'm interviewing here, like this guy, he's in the UAE speaking, right? So there are people in Arab countries that are coming out and they're very active on social media and speaking out. And I don't think we should allow terrorists to make us afraid, because that's exactly what they want. They want to silence us. So I do not let that get in the way, but I actually know a lot of people who are speaking out. I get them through social media, through people that I know already. I just find people and I email them and I'm like, can you join me for an interview? And then we just have a conversation. And more people are just turning towards us and are interested in what we're doing, and we want to make this bigger. So.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, I know it's a long day, but now we saved the best for last, right, Andrew?
Thank you,
it's a hard act to follow.
Ivy, thank you so much. And now we are reaching to the session with Andrew, which will basically conclude this part before we turn to the concluding panel discussion. So, again, we talked about many aspects during this day and a half. We got an amazing, different, enriching perspective from our guests, basically bringing those voices who do not present, actually, in the discussion in the West. And now we've been talking about, Hevi was talking about the discussion in the Arab media, which is fascinating to see the ins and outs and the twist in this discussion. But that obviously goes together with the major elephant in the room, and this is the challenges of social media and the need to address and apply critical thinking, particularly in our era, and particularly with the big monster around the corner, AI. So on that, Andrew, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. If you guys are wondering what I'm doing up here, believe me, so am I. It's been an incredible opportunity to really try to summarize what has been an almost 20-year career in media and marketing through the lens of the Middle East, as somebody who's only been to Israel a couple of times. First of all, I want to thank Avi, Maya, Dr. Schuster, not my father, Dr. Ron Schuster, also my dad, Dr. Schuster, the dentist, and to the presenters here. This has been an incredible, eye-opening experience, and I'm really just truly grateful to have been a part of it. So thank you guys for having me. I'm going to try to keep this quick. I know we have Ravens games and such tonight, and you've all been an incredible audience, so thank you guys for coming as well today. I'm basically going to try to put some context around how serious this issue is and how much we can help stop the spread of misinformation in America. I mean, when you hear Hevi's points and all the presenters' points about growing sentiment in the Middle East, and you see what's happening in other countries that are now, in some cases, just getting access to information, when you see that they're now becoming aware of the fact that Iran has been behind this disinformation campaign and a lot of the atrocities that have occurred in the Middle East, for example, and then you see the hijacking, what has been a long 20, almost 30-year process of Iran hijacking American institutions, academia, and media. People are just simply incorrect in their thinking, and for so long, it was incredibly difficult to explain to people that didn't know the realities of the situation, how Iran's the enemy and Israel's not, and even to my Jewish counterparts. So it's an incredibly exciting thing to see a world where we can actually call a spade, and we can look at Iran and say, that is the source of this disinformation. We can all agree on that now, and the fact that the world's in a place where that's possible is truly exciting. But what can we do about it, and how do we play into this? There's a couple things to look at broadly. Disinformation versus misinformation. So disinformation is what Iran is doing, the social media armies, Russia. Look, and the U.S. has been complicit in this in the Cold War era. This is not new, trying to start false narratives about opposing viewpoints and trying to challenge people's credibility and try to gain control of the storyline. What's really dangerous with the spread of social media and the fact that we all have a computer in our pockets is the fact that we literally, in this country in particular, have become the greatest amplifier of disinformation in human history. It's a really difficult problem to solve because AI is here, people are going to keep creating content themselves, people are going to share content, But the AI has become so evolved, and people have been able to figure out how to hack these algorithms. And I'll get more into algorithms for people that aren't aware of that term, but more about how social media is actually utilizing people's vulnerabilities, their emotions, their likes, their interests to prey on them and to try to, pretty much push an initiative or an agenda unintentionally that somebody's sharing. So the first thing to look at is the role of disinformation. We have to understand where that comes from, and I'll get into that in a second. And then misinformation, which is us just sharing bad news. Seeing something that might feel good because it reaffirms our bias, but in reality, half of that information is actually fake and from a foreign source. There are literally armies of people who create fake content on behalf of foreign actors, share them in a coordinated way in an effort to try to get us to actually share this content. It's fascinating, and it's happening every day. Social media as a news source is something else just broadly to look at. It's not, but we are. And in a world where everybody challenges every single fact they see, and you can put a slant on anything you see, we have a responsibility, particularly in America, to, I'd say even further, as American Jews, to be very, very mindful of what we do share. It's important to recognize other perspectives so that we can actually, make progress occur without getting lost into debates that will never win. So unfortunately, social media as a news source is what Americans are starting to believe. I think the percentage is something about, I have a stat on it, it's 75% of Americans have been fooled by fake news. It's a real problem, but there are ways to solve it, and that's what I'm gonna get into here in a moment. And lastly on this point, just overall, it's easy to think we can regulate our way out of this and that we can hold social media companies accountable, but we cannot stop technological advancements. Moore's Law, for anyone who's familiar with this, is this rule of exponential growth. Like, we're going to keep creating technology, we're going to keep evolving, and if we try to just minimize people's creativity, we will stifle that. But AI being able to think for itself and being able to prey on people's emotions, if that's what it's programmed to do, is an incredibly dangerous proposition. So it's a balancing act, and I think companies, governments, but more in particular individuals need to step up and start making more informed, more responsible choices about what they consume and what they share. It's kind of an all or nothing thing, in my view. You can either try to digest everything and see what's out there and be super active on social media, or you might want to consider if it's something that upsets you and then you can't seem to stop yourself from engaging in somewhat seemingly difficult conversations without realizing a lot of the people behind these are actually foreign adversaries, and a lot of the people you're engaging with online are actually bots. Like, they're not real people in some cases. So the more we actually engage in some cases, the worse it can get. So it's a bit of a difficult balancing act there. Yeah, 75% of Americans have been fooled by news headlines on social media. This is MIT, this is recent. It looks real, it feels real. The litmus test, it passed it in our view. We share it because it reaffirms a bias. Even going back to false reporting, about the death tolls in Gaza, for example, from the Gaza Health Ministry, who clearly is Hamas. These are things that people are starting to become aware of in their actual dissemination of information. So just something to think about. It's not uncommon. We shouldn't feel bad because we've all done this, but everybody has inadvertently spread misinformation for the most part. I'm gonna jump through a couple of these things because I know you guys know some of this, so I don't want to get too rudimentary here, but this is interesting. We don't trust, in this country at least, we don't trust traditional media. The trust in traditional media outlets and frankly institutions has gone down dramatically over time. And then when you couple that with this reality that you have actual news sources sharing fake information without checking it, the damage is done, right? For example, when the hospital video came out that Javi mentioned, with Hamas misfiring its own rocket, that the damage was already done in the sense that public perception had shifted. You saw a rise in anti-Semitic incidents, the same way that it occurred during the COVID-19 epidemic, and a rise and spike in Asian American hate crimes in this country. These things are not unrelated. The more fake news that is out there and perpetuated, the more likely somebody that is just not mentally stable might actually do something and act on it. So it's important to make sure that we're actually quelling that, just looking at what we're sharing, fact-checking it. There's some really basic things we can do, but by and large, a majority of political content is going to be generated or at least influenced by some kind of disinformation campaign. This is a fascinating slide to me. This is a recent study that used ChatGPT's new model to actually look at the entire universe of, let's call it pro-Israel or anti-Israel or pro-Palestine or anti-Palestine media outlets, and looking at not only their accuracy in reporting as well as what is just clear and blatant bias. So on one hand, people don't trust institutions. On the other hand, they're then using BBC, who seems like a moderate source, but shared wrong information as they're calling, as their flag. You see people, liberal Jews in America, young that are misinformed on college campuses, sharing information from Al Jazeera. It's mind-boggling, and that's with real journalism institutions and with real media companies. So when you look at how many accounts there are and how many citizen journalists there are in the world, this is a gigantic problem, frankly. We can't really trust anyone, and we have to realize that, yes, while we may agree with ADL or AIPAC's information, there's a whole other universe on the other side of this that looks at that as, terrorism. There are people that look at Zionism as terrorism. Peers of mine that I respected until that conversation occurred, these biases are reaffirmed. The people's inherent biases and misinformation they receive on the internet are reaffirmed by what seem to be credible news sources. And I think the reality that we live in today is that every single one of these organizations and every single one of us has some form of inherent bias. So that's what, when I say look at everything, I really mean it. If you want to really be informed, you should look at every opposing viewpoint. We should be consuming more Arabic media in this country. We should be watching Yalla TV. We should be trying to find out other sources of truth instead of relying on, Fox News or CNN. Yes, watch them, but don't trust any of these people, because at the end of the day, they are coming from some source that is made to sway you in one direction or the other. It's not one or the other. It's not political. It's just simply we're in a world that is so full of information and so full of sensationalism that we have to take a step back, in my view, in order to actually find truth in media. So misinformation we got into there for a moment. I want to talk really briefly just about the social media algorithms, how they work, and how they're built to actually spread misinformation. I'm going to give you a specific case study of how this works in terms of how we unintentionally share false narratives. But basically, social media is an advertising platform, right? It makes money by people engaging. It makes people by people liking, sharing, creating more content. That's why you see on Facebook and Instagram so many more videos and short form videos and these reels that you see, who are these people? They're getting paid by Facebook to create content as a traditional media company would, but at a massive scale. So these algorithms actually are rewarding content that seems to be popular. Seems innocent enough. But when you actually look at what happened when the evolution of social media occurred a few years ago, with the rise of ISIS's recruiting strategies have become the basis for viral marketing today. And it's actually crazy to say this, but ISIS was incredibly effective at creating content about why people should join their cause, recruiting them online in coordinated engagement campaigns. So here's what I mean by that. They had 300 people, that is ISIS. They had a social media army of young folks in vacant building in Syria. And these 300 people were just creating content designed to build sympathy with their cause and also to get people amped up and fired up to join their cause. And it was wildly effective. So Notre Dame did some significant research on this, and they studied how this actually worked. Somebody would create the video, somebody would like it, 2 minutes later the next guy would like it in this warehouse in a coordinated manner, and then these videos would then appear on the first page of Facebook, which is how you all see these wonderful memes of cats and children. It seems innocent enough, but it is so powerful and it is so widespread that ISIS can do that. And it's something that social media companies have taken note of. There have been, changes. There have been regulatory shifts. There's been oversight, but it's constantly evolving because you can't really stop, these bad actors from actually utilizing this technology. So that, along with the fact that, social media is designed to prey on our vulnerabilities, it's designed to actually make us feel good about whatever perspective we have. You have a very dangerous environment where bad actors and Iran, Russia, and others can have people create content on their behalf, share it, and that's just the start. When you couple that, I'm going to come back to this, but when you couple that with the role of now artificial intelligence, I know everybody's familiar with it in theory, but you have generative artificial intelligence now that can literally create entire narratives while someone sleeps, create content that looks real, share it, distribute it, the entire thing, and continue to do that day in and day out. It's really horrifying to think about the fact that these things can start figuring out how to prey on vulnerabilities and create division between us in this country, let alone globally. It's a really scary future. It's a horrifying thought, but it's not lost. And hearing the perspectives of my co-presenters this weekend, and hearing how much hope there is in the Middle East, it made me take pause. And last night I went pretty deep into a rabbit hole because I had to figure out the applicability of this in the Middle East. You know, I'm here as a, you know, American media perspective, American Jewish media perspective, to talk about what we experience and how we might be able to help combat misinformation, because there is a war happening and we are actually being targeted, and we are helping perpetuate this fake information by actually just thinking we're doing the right thing. In reality, the more we engage with this machine, the more we engage with in what is in most cases fake news, the worse things get. So what do we do about this, right? I mean, 20% of tweets around political events on X now are fake. I mean, they're literally fake. This is proven time and time again. This is the Knight Foundation in 2022, incredibly credible, very credible, well-respected media and data organization. This is a real problem, and we can't necessarily stop that. So how do we stop it? What can we do? Iran has been incredibly effective in propaganda at scale using social media and absolutely manipulating these algorithms. When you look at the takeover of American academic institutions, when you look at the recent takeover of the LGBTQ community, they figured out that if they just basically try to manipulate all of us in our own way, that they're going to be effective. And for a period of time, it really was effective. And then trying to explain to somebody, obviously, that might be saying, well, you know, why do you support Israel? And trying to explain the complexities of this for years was incredibly difficult to do. But because of the efforts of, you know, good global actors, and because of the success, frankly, that I think Israel's had, because of the Abraham Accords, because of the actual potential for peace in the Middle East, there is a better way to do this. And oddly enough, ChatGPT recently found an entire cell of Iranian, basically hackers, who are called Storm 2035, excuse me. ChatGPT noticed some very interesting activity happening, and they saw that there was someone or several people trying to create what looked like authentic news, not only, oddly enough, not only targeting anti-Israel rhetoric, but pro-Israel rhetoric. I mean, there was an investigation done by Microsoft and ChatGPT literally 2.5 weeks ago that shut down a cell of this Iranian terrorist group, digital media terrorist group, that were making what looked like credible websites, both on the right and left, that were making fake content on both sides. It was passing the sniff test, but not nearly enough. They caught it early, they stopped it, and I truly believe that this has something to do with what we're seeing in shifting narratives in the Middle East. I think this can work. You know, we can't silence voices, we can't regulate social media forever, but what we can do is we can implore these companies that are providing this incredible technology to actually look out for these kinds of hateful and hate-inciting disinformation campaigns, stop them. We know the playbook. Iran was incredibly effective, but those days have ended. People are aware, and it's not just these companies actually doing the regulation. When you see something that is obviously fake on the internet, we have an absolute responsibility to flag it. You know, Havi made a great point. Share it, share your context. That's great as well. But if you will actually report something as spam to Facebook or Instagram or any of these social platforms, Twitter down the line, Twitter maybe not, but most of these platforms will respond. They will shut the page down. They will investigate it. And that's how we stop the spread of disinformation. We can prevent another Iranian hostile takeover type of situation for the future of our children, but it's going to take personal responsibility. It's going to take each of us, the informed civil society of this country, to actually take pause, read what we're seeing before we share it, before we get upset, understand how severe this problem is. This is a new form of warfare. Understand how severe these implications are of sharing something that might be misleading, and give ourselves a chance to actually protect the future of the perception about not only Israel, but about the Jewish people. And it's not just limited to us. Again, I gave the example of Asian Americans and the spike in hate crimes then. To hear the empowerment that's coming out of the Middle East right now, and to hear and see young people that are questioning Iran for the first time is incredibly inspiring, and something that I personally, my grandfather was a Holocaust survivor, my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and my father for many, many years has made this clear to me, the role of Iran, and I got it, but it's not a conversation I could have for a long time because people say conspiracy theory this, conspiracy theory that. This is absolute and definitive evidence that this is happening, and there's no denying it anymore. So I really believe and I hope that this is the basis for a more proactive approach to battling disinformation, and I hope you guys really took something of value out of this conversation, just in the sense of how can we make a difference? There's a lot we can't control. We can't go to Israel in some cases. We can't go support people that are, in need necessarily all the time. But we can absolutely be more informed global citizens without throwing fuel on the fire. So, one last quote I'll leave you with is from Professor Tim Wenninger, who's an absolute expert on this information at Notre Dame. And he says, "You just need a bot to get it into the conversation, and then real people do the rest of the work. We, the well-meaning individuals, do most of the bad work. And the reason is because we don't read before we share." This is not complicated stuff. It's very simple. So there's a lot we can do, media literacy, critical thinking, all of these very obvious things, but I encourage us all to take a step back with the internet. We're very lucky here that we've had a lot of access to a lot of information for a very long time. I think we need to take a step back. I think we need to lean into conversations and dialogue like the one we've all had this weekend and work together to ensure not only a peace and path forward in the Middle East, but to ensure that we are not going to be the reason for any further spread of misinformation. We can make an impact, we can make a difference, and just by being here, you all have done that. So thank you guys so much for the time and for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. Andrew, are there tips that you can tell us how to suspect that what we're looking at is fake? I mean,
yeah.
If it's so good, we're not going to know it's fake.
I mean, so this is an interesting problem because of two things. One, deep fake videos. I'm sure you've all heard of this, where you can create a video in some cases that looks like it actually happened and looks real and it looks deceptive. There are actual Google has a tool where you can take the image or the link to it, drop it in, and it'll tell you if it's fake or AI generated. And that's going to change. It's hard to catch. The more concerning thing is not AI here. I've been seeing some examples of recycled videos used by social media warriors to perpetuate a cause. For example, there was something found recently of a video of Ukrainian soldiers from maybe 6 months ago that was used like a few weeks ago to try to as a form of anti-Israel media. And on social media, people are just sharing this stuff. They're not even so the fact checking in the media, the actual media agencies who fact check this information, they have to take a more proactive role. They can't just share information they see either. It's just a very difficult thing to do to the naked eye. But I think we actually have a list of resources in the that we put together in the pamphlet you guys all have, with a list of websites from PolitiFact down to the actual Google image searches that you can use to actually verify and validate this information. But you have to assume a lot of if it doesn't look real, you might think that it's not, but it's getting advanced, and I think it is a real concern that we have to keep an eye on.
Great. Someone asked a question. They said that their Facebook got disabled, their account, for making posts against Hamas. How can we counter social media? They were concerned about being censored.
It's so counterintuitive what I'm going to say, but don't do that. We cannot fight fire with fire here, because the fire are these algorithms who are going to exploit our emotions. It's really problematic. So not responding and taking action in our own ways and not needing other people's confirmation bias, I think, is a solution. It might seem trite, it might seem too simplified, but that's the only way, because you're going to continue to see disinformation campaigns emerge, and it's going to become more difficult to detect. So just just reporting one another and just trying to, be louder isn't necessarily the tax here. I think real conversations off the internet. And again, I run a digital marketing company. Me saying to get off the internet is probably the worst thing I can say to people. But it's about taking a step back and really looking at the context of this is a weapon. We have weapons in our pockets, and we are perpetuating false information without even realizing it half the time. So if we're going to share, it's got to be very clear, and it has to be, frankly, empathetic. I think that's the other thing that we do, particularly in the Jewish American, even moderate Jewish American culture. We get upset, and why wouldn't we get upset? Well, somebody said this, so I'm going to say something back, and I think it's human nature to a large degree. But by not responding to those what might be fake articles, fake content, and working with your own spheres of influence in your own social networks, your own communities to actually understand these realities might be a better solution than trying to combat somebody one-to-one in terms of engagement.
And I don't really completely understand. They're looking for a reaction, but what does that do to the post? Does that just legitimize it more?
It amplifies it. And because you have everybody not believing media anymore at all or not trusting facts, social proof is the new currency, right? So if Facebook will just see if something seems to be actually trending and people are liking it in short order. It has to happen in rapid succession. I actually encourage you guys, there's a great podcast from Notre Dame that they talk about how they study these actual engagement algorithms from that ICE example I gave. But there's ways to hack it in such a way where if one person likes it at a certain moment, the next person shares it. There are steps you can take to make content go viral. So it's not necessarily, and Facebook, to their credit, they've done a good job of using artificial intelligence and fact-checking inside of the actual comments. So I'd encourage everyone, when you see something on Facebook and click in the comments, you can see Facebook will give you basically an overview of the sentiment of the commenters. Some people are skeptical about this, so you don't have to go through the entire process of fact-checking every single thing. But ultimately, the more we share in some cases and the louder we are, the more the Irans of the world can use that to their advantage. It's very problematic, and it's also, we don't want to stay silent, but we don't want to be the ones perpetuating false narratives. So it's a difficult balancing act, and there's no simplified answer except for just be wary of what you're reading and know that if you do engage and respond, not only can that be used against you by disinformation campaigns and bad actors, but you may be actually arguing with robots, like literally robots. So there's a lot of fake accounts, and there's a lot of need for reform on social media, but it takes personal action, personal accountability, I think, to change our approach and dialogue in that context.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all very much for all your presentations. It's awesome, it's great. And I think we're going to move to the summary section.
All right, a couple of minutes, we are kind of like resetting ourselves. Meanwhile, I was kind of like, I'll share with you a funny story, short story, following Ivy's presentation, when she talks about the need to present to the Arab world, in the Arab discussion, the faces of Israel, the many faces of Israel, something that is, not the regular, way Israel has been presented in a negative context. So over a decade ago or so, I was initiating by my own an initiative called Finjan. Finjan is a word that you may know that it's the cup that you drink the coffee. And I initiated an initiative called Finjan. Finjan was short videos that I was doing in Arabic with an English subtitles. And those videos were basically addressing the Arab world. And in each video, I was talking about different aspects of Israel, culturally, historically, people, events, not only politics, food, all those things. They were short videos of a couple of minutes each one. I did something like 200 or 250 of those videos, and I got interesting reactions from people in the Arab world, in Arabic. And one of the interesting common reaction was that many times the first thing that people asked me was, are you from the Mossad? And so I answered, no, I'm not Mossad. I'm a private person. I'm not from the Mossad. And then there was a funny correspondence because somebody wrote to me and said, are you from Mossad? And I was like, no, I'm not Mossad. And then the next question was, how can I join Mossad? That's talking about trying to talk to, yes. By the way, interesting enough about the issue of Finjan that I just mentioned, again, it's kind of like knowing the culture and knowing the inside stories of this region. If you ask Israeli Jews, not Israeli Arabs, if you ask Israeli Jews what is Finjan, they will tell you that Finjan is the pot that you make the coffee with. That is inaccurate. That is wrong. Finjan is the cup that you drink the coffee with. But here is an interesting story. When I was in my chapter as an educator in a high school, and I was also teaching my students Arabic, we talked about it, the story of Finjan, as a reflection of misknowledge of culture and misunderstanding of culture and so on, and how narratives are so deeply rooted. Why was this narrative so deeply rooted within the Israeli Jews? Because in the Israeli culture and terminology, Finjan was viewed as this pot, and that's it. Never mind the fact that this is not the pot, this is the cup. Long story short, one day one of my students came with a package that you can buy in a store. That was a package that was made by the biggest sweets and chocolate and coffee company in Israel. It's called Elite. And in the package, they had a pot and a bag of coffee. And they wrote a story in the back of the package. And they called the pot Finjan. They made a mistake. They called it Finjan, but that's not. So I told my students, look, you know what? Write a letter to the company and tell them this is a mistake. Finjan is not the pot. Finjan is the cup. So they did. Believe it or not, we got an answer back, a formal answer from Elite Company. And the answer was, we know that Finjan is the cup and it's not the pot. We know that. But it is so deeply imprinted in the Israeli narrative, we see no reason to change that. So here is an interesting lesson about narratives and about the need to change narratives and how sometimes it's so difficult to change narratives. So I think that we can start arranging ourselves to our concluding panel. I would like to invite all of our wonderful guests to the stage. Please join me as we are setting ourselves to the final and concluding session, the concluding panel, concluding this wonderful day, 2 days.
Avi, it's been wonderful 2 days. As you go into your concluding, some of the questions, common questions are things like, is a two-state solution possible? What are possibilities, different scenarios that you could see that can happen? What can we look for to let us know, be tuned in?
Yeah, as you can see in the booklet, the guiding theme of this concluding panel is to talk about Israel and the geostrategic landscape of the Middle East, trying to look ahead. Of course, now that we have this hopefully enriching educationally experience of the last 2 days, I believe that now we could have a more fruitful discussion on that specific theme. Okay. So I would like to start by just trying to kind of like really shortly, in a few sentences, frame what I think are the major insights that I think we can take from these 2 days. And I have a couple of major insights. First, I will sigh and say that I think, Ron, this is for you. You couldn't pick better time, I'm telling you. We are in a pivotal moment. The timing of this conference is amazing. This is one thing that I want to emphasize. The other thing that I think we can take away from these 2 days is that there are such complex processes and powers that shape the story of the Middle East. And one of the things that we noticed is the gap between the reality of the Middle East and the way it's being portrayed in a Western discussion. And one other things that I would like to take as a framing insight is what happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East. The ramifications exceeds this region. So I would like to turn to my colleagues and actually to have an open discussion among yourself and kind of like framing it under the title of Israel and the geostrategic landscape of the Middle East, trying to look ahead as much as possible. And I would like to start with generally kind of like short answers, sort of speaking. When you look ahead, currently right now, we are today in 2024, the end of September, trying to look ahead, decade ahead. In a couple of words, do you see more positive or more negative process ahead? Whoever wants to start. But we'll try to do it shortly because we have a total of 20 minutes.
So I think it's we should be okay. You can hear me? You can't? This way you can hear me? Yeah?
Closer.
Okay. So I think we should be optimistic about what's happening in the Middle East right now. We are witnessing a very important moment where the nightmare of having terrorist organizations in the region is coming to an end, thanks to Israel's effort, thanks to the IDF efforts. And this will definitely pave the way for actual peace conversations between the people who want peace. One of the big issues that people speak about all the time right now, or I think prematurely even, is the issue of the two-state solution. And since day one of this war, and even before that, when the situation was not ripe for the two-state solution at all, everyone was just speaking about it the day after in Gaza, the two-state solution, as if it is a magical solution that will happen overnight so easily and everything will be fine afterwards. It was not possible before Israel succeeded in crushing Hamas and crushing Hezbollah. Now, as these organizations are on their way out of our way, I think it would be possible to negotiate these issues, especially when we get to the point when the Palestinian people eventually realize that they are not, the Palestinians and the Arabs from behind them and Iran, I mean, Iran, let it alone, it will also be crushed the same way these terrorist organizations are being crushed now. But I mean, when the people involved realize that it's not benefiting them anyway, working on eliminating Israel or obsessing about eliminating Israel, but rather putting more and more effort in building their own reality, their own future. This is what really matters for the Middle East, and I think more and more leaders in the region are realizing this. Just a few minutes ago, I read with Maya a very interesting statement by the Saudi Crown Prince. He said, I don't care for the Palestinian issue anymore. I care for my own country. And this is Saudi Arabia, like the mother of the Sunni Muslim world. This means a lot, and this is a great indication that despite the ugliness we're living in right now, the gloomy scene we're in right now, we are heading in the right direction.
Let me try. Is it sounding good? Okay, so yeah, I mean, definitely I am optimistic. I am generally more optimistic as a person, but I think I'm also a realist. But you can't, when you see what's happening right now, in terms of the developments that are currently happening, obviously, even in my opinion, Israel's war on Hamas is basically the beginning of the elimination of this access that has, ravished through this region for far too long. And what we're seeing today with the elimination of Hassan Nasrallah, and today actually there's a lot of upcoming news about also the Houthis being targeted. Also, Israel is retaliating to the Houthis attacking Israel. But there are changes that are happening so rapidly that are definitely moving us in the right direction. So yes, I am very hopeful. I do think though that the media is really, really important tool in educating and following your story about Finjan. So, though it is difficult, right? It is hard. It's like you're going against something that has been ingrained for so long and for decades, but at the same time, it's, this is the right thing to do, right? And that people somehow, they will find their way back to the truth and that the truth will prevail. And I think that we are in an age, such an interconnected world that things are happening faster. So with that change that's happening on the ground and then having those initiatives like what you guys are doing and of course like what Yalla is doing is what is going to make the people realize and educated on the level of the people while, the actual changes that are happening in terms of the military and the balance of powers that is changing in the region.
I think the future is certainly rosy and positive for Israel, at least for the coming 20 years. These wars will allow Israel to live in safety and prosperity and security. This does not necessarily apply to every country in the region. So Lebanon now has an opportunity. If they take it, things will be good for them and even better for Israel. If they don't, I think the train will just pass by them with them not getting on board. Saudi Arabia will certainly and definitely normalize ties with Israel in the coming year. There's no way around this. Now, keep in mind, if the Saudis do this, this does not mean all the Islamic world is coming with Saudi Arabia. But Saudi Arabia is big and important enough. So I think what we will see is that we will see a prosperous region that includes Israel, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, maybe another country or two. Jordanians and Egyptians might want to catch up. No one knows what happens there. And you will see another region of despair that includes Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. Now, Lebanon, I just said they have an opportunity to snap out of it. Not sure they'll take it. I hear that everyone is now talking to Assad and trying to strike a deal with him, a bargain. If you abandon the Islamists and Iran and get on board with peace, you will stay. And we will remove sanctions. This is ongoing. I don't think it'll happen. I don't think he'll ever sign peace, but he's used this trick all the time. He promises peace. Once the sanctions are removed, he reneges. But this is what we see. So it's a mixed bag. I can't say that the whole region is positive. I can't say that the whole region is negative. But the certainty is that Israel and a few countries are in for a treat in the coming decade or two.
Okay, so I have two more questions because we have a little time left, but I still want to try to touch them, so I will appreciate if you could very shortly comment about them. The last question will be about the discussion in the context of the Western discussion and including the whole issue of the social media and Andrew, what you talked about, we have weapon in our pocket. How do you turn this weapon into something that is constructive? So will be the last question when I would address. Before that, I want to address another question. We understand the negative destructive forces in the region. We talked about them. We understand why it's so significant to neutralize them. My question is, what are the constructive forces that you could see today in the region that actually are going to play a role in shaping significantly the trajectory ahead?
Sorry, guys, I will start again. So I will say it is the silent majority in the Arab world. The many young people who were born long after all the wars between Arabs and Israel happened, who witnessed the momentum of the Arab Spring, who saw with their own eyes, at least in Egypt, like in Egypt's case, that Israel has been a good neighbor and a good friend to all the Arabs. It didn't hurt anyone, including when countries after the Arab Spring were very weak, who also witnessed the momentum of the Abrahamic Accords. And they know that peace is benefiting them economically and politically. These people are the ones who need to be empowered, the young people, the silent majority in the Arab world.
I will add very quickly. Just basically, I think also like the Abraham Accord countries, I think we're having this as a foundational start to something that, if what Hussein says, will include Saudi Arabia, obviously that would be a historical step in the right direction. And I think that will have major impact on Israel's relationship with Muslims all over the world. But I do think that we have already a foundation where these countries made and signed these deals. You know, we have to give it to the UAE for making this first right step, very courageous. And then also Bahrain and Morocco. And I think if they, you know, with Israel, make actual steps in terms of empowering that silent majority that Dalia is talking about, that will actually move the things and the situation and realities in the right direction on the ground. So.
No, it's okay. As far as optimism, I just want to go back to that real quick before I jump into the phone thing, but the idea that I could freely travel to some of these countries in the Middle East as an American Jew, as descendant of Holocaust survivors, is incredibly, it's so powerful to me, and I can't wait to see that future unfold. So I think going to places, meeting people, that's the solution. I mean, trite is a word I keep using because some of these solutions I'm proposing are really simple, but if we stop engaging with what is clearly either wildly narcissistic or clearly fake information on the internet, and we stop getting so upset about what other people think, and we find ways to expand our minds and listen to other viewpoints and seek more information. Podcasts for right now are somewhat safe. There are AI podcasts, but listen to podcasts. It's a 3-hour journey into someone else's perspective, and that's an incredible way to spend time instead of doom scrolling is the term they use on social media. So I think being very skeptical and aware of what's going on, but being more productive, being more empathetic, and just working with people where we can and meeting people where we can instead of trying to fight with them. I just believe that's the way we can turn this entire thing around.
Well, two things. Number one, I think we have to start thinking in this country and over there in the Middle East of outside the box, of new ways, new ideas. Who says who that 2-state is engraved in stone, or 1 state, or 3 states, or 5 states? We have to define the goal, and the goal is to have a good life living standard for Palestinians and Israelis, Lebanese and Syrians. What do we need to do to get there? It can be sovereignty, no sovereignty, but the point is that we're so stuck about old issues that we're not sure why. Why do Palestinians need sovereignty? The Lebanese have it, and look at what they have with sovereignty. So this is about the region. My second point is about here, the United States, domestic. Our democracy, I think, is threatened. The Republic is under threat. And the reason I think why is because any republic and democracy is as good as the awareness of its own citizens. We can't continue to have people dumbing themselves down. If everyone relies on TikTok for the republic, then the republic will be TikTok republic. So this is an issue that I know it affects our work as people who work on the Middle East because everything is distorted or upside down, but it also affects this country. And over the past 2 days, I've been asked so many questions on the side about the domestic scene of the United States, and I really have no answers, and it's unfortunate. And as an American, I want good answers. I can't find them, but this, like Andrew's saying, it starts here with us, in our houses, our kids, your kids, everybody else's kids. We have to push them back to listening and reading and writing and getting interested.
You know, I want to follow up on Hussein's point. What do you think, like, in terms of, like, the, you know, talking about solutions, right? I did talk about this to Avi before, but, you know, the kind of thinking outside the box, right? But even in countries, in other countries in the Middle East, Israel is definitely creating a model where I got to interview people who are Assyrians in Israel, from the Assyrian community, a Christian ancient community, and they are getting basically funding and support from the Israeli government. They have their own schools, churches, communities, right? And these are things that are just so needed in so many other parts of the Middle East, where there are communities that were literally destroyed by extremists, by ideologies that want them not to exist any longer. You see that there's Druze that are protesting in southern Syria right now that would love to have their own some sort of autonomy to be protected and to actually have and practice what they believe in and freedom without being afraid of any extremism. So that model could apply to so many countries in the region where different groups don't feel that they are protected and they have the ability to be themselves and to stay in their homeland, while everything else is going on. So thinking outside the box, I think it's such an important aspect in terms of how to see the future of this region and respecting and cherishing and celebrating people's differences, which hasn't been happening, even though traditionally it's such a diverse region.
So we're about to conclude our 2 days conference. I would just add my perspective. Ron?
I have one more question. Well, this is my last question. But I think we would be missing an opportunity and derelict in our duties if we didn't, and it would be somewhat ironic if it turns out that the events of October 7th somehow turned the Middle East around. But I would like to know from you, how do you see the hostage situation ending? Are they coming home, or when is it going to happen? What is your opinions on those 100 and some human beings being kept in Gaza?
Thank you for raising up this issue, because it's a shame that people speak about everything related to the current scene in Gaza except about the situation of the hostages, keeping in mind that a number of them are actually American citizens, and the United States is not appropriately intervening to help get them out of these tunnels. Actually, the other day, about a few weeks ago, there was a mockery in Washington to the tunnels. And they tried to give us the experience of how the people who are living the tunnels are, what they are experiencing in these dark tunnels. And I tell you, I couldn't stay there for 1 minute. It's really horrible, thinking of them being there for so long, people not speaking about them as if they are destined to fate, to meet their fate alone, is not acceptable. All this talk about ceasefire, about negotiating with Hamas, and all this nonsense should have been replaced by talks about releasing the hostages. I still have hope that many of them still alive and they will come out and life will go back to normal. The Jewish people who survived the Holocaust will survive this too.
Well, I have the politics behind this is that Sinwar thinks, or he's using the remaining hostages to get everyone back to October 6th. And he's putting these hostages against the interest of Israel, the people of Israel, and many other forces in the region. And unless the world and Israel agrees to go back, and going back to October 6th means Israel withdrawing completely from the Strip, handing it over back to Sinwar and Hamas as the de facto government. There's no way Israel will accept this, and I think this is correct. Now, there's a chance that if Israel manages to lay its hands on Sinwar like it did Nasrallah, then the chances of getting these hostages out, which means, after the defeat of Sinwar, because there's no point of, keeping them to trade over them. So the trade aspect is over, and that's when, there's hope of getting them out. But I think in a deal, all the Security Council resolutions and the US statements, I don't think they will lead to releasing them.
I will add from a different perspective, since we now talked about it. There has been, or up until now, there still exists, but it may change, a sound kind of like what we call a Gordian knot. The Gordian knot is, the legend is about this knot that nobody was able to untie. And then Alexander the Great basically came, and with his sword, he just cut this knot. What do I mean by that? There is a strange relationship between the story of what happened in the northern front between Israel and Hezbollah and the story of Gaza Strip and the hostages. The issue was that Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, basically said, since he started attacking Israel on October 8th, he said, I will stop the attacks once there is going to be a ceasefire in Gaza Strip. But ceasefire in Gaza is not the interest of Sinwar. So you got a situation where the two members of this axis of resistance, one is Hamas and the other one is Nasrallah, actually they found themselves in opposing interests, because as time went by, Hezbollah basically was looking for ways to get out from the corner where he niched itself by this statement of Nasrallah. But Sinwar didn't want to get out of the corner because he is hoping, or he was hoping, that it's going to result in a regional war. Now, maybe taking down Nasrallah and the substantial damage that the Hezbollah sustained, maybe that could generate a process where there'll be some sort of like moving progress towards an arrangement in Lebanon that basically will cut the relationship between the story of Hezbollah in Lebanon and the story of Hamas in Gaza, and that maybe could boost a process of bringing back the hostages and ending the situation in Gaza. But there are many moving parts to this story. So for the time being, realistically speaking, we still look at a situation where Sinwar, or whoever controls the situation for Hamas in Gaza, is still in the same position. I do want to hope and believe that we'll see the hostages back home as soon as possible. But I think that we also have to be realistic in our expectations at this point.
Well, I think we all owe you a big round of applause.
I'm gonna. We should actually be applauding you all for sticking with us for 2 days. We know it was long. We're grateful. Look, here is a survey, okay? We've been working on this survey. Please fill it out. Give us your feedback. And also, one more time, October 10th, 7 p.m., if you found this kind of education to be important, 7 p.m., October 10th, my name and the date is everywhere in that book. Please be in touch, and we'll give you the details for the meeting. But thank you all. Thank our guests. And we hope to see, maybe in the spring, we'll do this again. Okay? Thank you, guys. Thank you. Shana Tova.